And just so everyone's aware, we are going to start our YouTube stream now. Good morning, David.
Morning, how's it going?
So far, so good. We're off and running.
We are.
I still have a couple of minutes.
Yeah, I have
We'll call the meeting to
8:27.
order.
My clock is,
By my official clock at the Manuel household.
Good morning, Chris. Rich is on.
good morning, Rich. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you.
You're good. I do see Commissioner Mitten as well. He doesn't have the audio yet, but he's logging in now, it appears. Hey, Ron, you're with us. I thought you might not be here for this meeting. I told Cliff to defer to Natalie, but are you?
Yeah, I'm here for this meeting. It's probably the board meeting I won't be able to be at.
Gotcha. I appreciate that. All right. Thank you.
I'm gonna do my best to be in two places at once. I'm not sure how two Zoom meetings are gonna work at the same time. So
Interesting. All right.
Chris, you're gonna have to bear with me because, like I said earlier, I had to search for packets to send out to board members, and I don't have anything up at this moment. I don't have Unicode up, so it'll be a few moments for me.
All right.
You can blame some of that on me, Chris.
It happens to all of us.
Jennifer's doing a great job, though.
No, she is. She always does.
Yes.
I think it's about the time to call for the bell. Got 8:30 at the Manuel household.
Hey,
Can you update us on this morning for our committee? Looks like we got one.
if you can wait 1 minute, Cliff, I think Jennifer was asking for a little time because she had to get something. But I will tell you, I know that Commissioner Mitten is here, and of course, Rich McLean. I'm looking at the list of who we have among committee members. Commissioner Starkey.
Good morning, everyone. John Mitten.
Good morning, Commissioner. And I do see.
I hope everyone is doing well.
We are, thank you. Commissioner
I wanted
Starkey
to.
is logging in. Yes, sir.
So I wanted to bring everyone. I think I had emailed Jennifer that I can be part of this committee meeting at 8:30, and then I must serve on our canvassing board for about 2 hours, hopefully less, and then I will be able to join the regular board meeting in session once that is completed.
Very good. Thank you.
Chris, just let me know when Jennifer's back.
Yeah, I'll do that. I'm watching right now to see attendees. Jennifer, you still need a little time?
Nope, I'm good.
Very good. I will tell you that, give it 1 second, Cliff. I see Chair Holton is logging in now, so I was trying to get his audio connected.
We'll certainly wait for Chair Holton.
Yes, we will.
Here we go. You all, can you hear me?
Heck, we can't hear you. All right, very good. All right, so Jennifer's ready to go. So Cliff, I think we are ready to proceed.
I just wanted to confirm we have a quorum for our committee. Jennifer?
I apologize, but I haven't had a chance to look due to the other things I'm working on. So I'm just going to go ahead and call roll and we'll start there. If you want to call the meeting to
All
order.
right, sounds good. Thank you. I'm calling the meeting to order now. It's, I got 8:31. So if we could do roll call real quick, I'd appreciate it. Thank you, Jennifer.
Yes, sir. Cliff Manuel,
Present. Present.
Janet Long, Jim Holton,
Present.
John Mitten,
Present.
Commissioner Starkey,
Here.
and Rich McLean.
Present.
Okay. We do have a quorum, so we can go ahead and continue.
Sounds like we're good to go. So I'd like to recognize public comment if we have any. If anybody from the public would like to address the board, this would be the appropriate time to do that.
Mr. Manuel, we do not have anybody on the public comment line at this time, and we received no emails regarding this meeting.
Thank you. Moving on to the consent agenda item, we do have the July Legislative Committee minutes attached and sent out in the packet previously by Jennifer. If y'all have had a chance to review those, I'd like to have a motion and second for them to be accepted into our records.
I'll move to approve.
Second.
No interested parties on the minutes. Interesting.
Would you like me to go ahead and take a roll call on the vote?
Did we get a motion and second? I didn't hear it if we did, so maybe I just.
We did.
I didn't pick that.
Motion for approval.
Roll call, please. Thank you.
Okay, sure. Cliff Manuel,
Yes.
Jim Holton,
Yes.
Commissioner Mitten,
Yes.
Commissioner Starkey,
Yes.
and Rich McLean.
Yes.
Okay, motion passes 5-0.
Thank you. The next item for our committee members today is a update from our federal legislative update from Van Scoyoc. Henry and Steve, I believe both are on, but not sure which one wants to give the update, but you're both recognized.
Hi, it's Harry Glenn from Van Scoyoc Associates. I'll start and then I'll pass on to my colleague Steve. I guess we've got a couple updates. One is on the current status of the next COVID relief package, and that's the House and Senate continue to negotiate on. We have an update on the budget process, and then also on the status of the highway and the FAST Act reauthorization, the Highway and Transit Reauthorization Program. So I'll kick it off and talk about the. I'm sure you've all been following the discussions on the COVID relief bill. The last time the House and Senate and the White House met was on August 7th to discuss the next COVID relief package. Those negotiations broke down, and the White House and the Democrat leadership haven't met since. I think they've exchanged a few phone calls. And there seems to be, at least as of the last couple of days, there didn't seem to be any movement towards re-engaging on another COVID relief bill. As you'll recall, there was funding in the House-passed HEROES Act back in May, additional funding for transit authorities. There was no money in the Senate version of that bill, and that's kind of where we have it right now. There has been some movement, though, over the last couple of days. The House is actually coming back a couple weeks early tomorrow, have a rare Saturday session to vote on a bill that would provide $25 billion in funding for the Postal Service, and also slow down some changes that the new Postmaster General is trying to make related to mail delivery and the delivery of mail ballots. there's some conversation now that the fact that the House is going to pass a bill to support the post office may jumpstart the COVID negotiations. There's a letter circulating from 17 House Democrats to the Speaker asking her to re-engage with the Republicans to try and get another COVID relief bill done sooner rather than later. We'll see where that goes. And we continue to monitor to see what happens on any future funding for transit agencies. We know you benefited from the funding was included in the CARES Act back in March. So that's the COVID update. The other thing I would say about COVID, and then I'm going to pass on to Steve, is there is some conversation now, if they don't have any luck getting negotiations restarted next week, that they may wrap another COVID relief bill up with a bill to continue funding the federal government past September 30th. As you know, the September 30th is the end of the current fiscal year. The new fiscal year begins October 1st. And Congress will have to pass what they call a continuing resolution to keep the government operating into the new fiscal year and past the election. So and that's a must-pass bill. So there's some conversation about maybe including some COVID relief funding on that bill to and keep the government operating. But Steve, I'm going to pass to Steve Palmer. He can talk about the appropriations and the authorization front.
Thank you, Harry, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. What I'll just add on the appropriations front is that even though it is August 21st and you think there'd be some time for Congress to wrap up some of the appropriations bills, as Harry intimated, they are on their traditional August recess, with the exception of coming back and the House working on this Postal Service bill. They return in the legislative session on September 8th after Labor Day, and they only have 3 weeks until the fiscal year starts. So it's typically a time when they start to focus on a continuing resolution. We expect that it will probably last until November, December timeframe. Obviously the election will have a large outcome on how they handle those appropriations bills, as well as, and let me segue into the third issue that Harry mentioned, the Surface Transportation Reauthorization Bill. The FAST Act, as you recall, expires on September 30th, as well as a 5-year bill that funds highways transit programs. And the House has passed the Moving Forward Act, and that was the $1.5 trillion bill that included a significant increase for transit. The Senate had last year acted on the highway portion of the bill, but has done nothing since then. So they're looking at an extension. They don't call it a continuing resolution. They're looking at an extension. Probably, no one has really called it out yet, but probably a year at current funding levels at the FAST Act levels. So that would not be that harmful for TBARTA or other transit agencies, because it would continue the formula programs, the Section 5307 programs, as well as the other programs that TBARTA benefits from. We're keeping a close eye on it to make sure there aren't any deviations from that, but we do expect that will start to become a little more clear in early September. Mr. Chairman, with that, I think we're happy to return it back to you and answer any questions the board may have.
Hey, Mr. Chairman, it's Harry. Just one other note. I'm sure everybody's following the election results from Tuesday, and we will have a new member from your coverage area in the House. Ross Spano lost his primary, so there's an election there between Scott Franklin now and Cohen. Mr. Spano was a member of the House Transportation Committee, and so we don't know what a new member from that district, what committees he'll be on, but there will be a new member from your coverage area next year.
Thank you, Harry. Committee members, board members that are present, any questions for Steve or Harry this morning? Thank you very much for your update. I'd like to move now to Ron Pierce. You're recognized.
Good morning, Mr.
Good
Chairman.
morning, Ron.
I'll be pretty brief. I think most of the action's happening in DC these days, so I think Harry and Steve are going to have most of the update this morning. Just a couple of things to point out. Last week, you probably saw that the Revenue Estimating Conference for the state of Florida put out new revenue estimates based upon sales tax collection and other trust fund collection for not only the current fiscal year, but also next year as well. Not great news. It was actually a little bit better than everybody expected, but right now revenue estimates are off about $5.4 billion for the next 2 years, of which almost $3 billion of that is for the current fiscal year that we're in. Remember, let me remind everybody, currently the state is sitting on almost $4 billion in reserves, as well as another $4 to $5 billion in federal government dollars that they received, for COVID funding. So There is money to backfill some of this, but we do expect probably for that, for the hose potentially to get bigger as additional revenue estimates come out throughout the year. I only mention that because that kind of leads into my next thing is, as we continue to have discussions about a recurring revenue source, we have to keep in the back of our mind, obviously, that a bad budget year in Tallahassee is going to make it more difficult, not impossible, but difficult looking for recurring revenue. So at our last meeting, Secretary Gwen, who I see is on the call here, suggested that we write a letter to DOT. We've worked with David and the team to kind of craft the letter to request an initial meeting to kind of sit down and start talking about what revenue would look like, recurring revenue would look like, kind of moving forward, working with the DOT Tallahassee office, as well as working with Secretary Gwen, just to get a better understanding of A, what would revenue look like, B, and I think more importantly, what would that true partnership look like moving forward to make sure that we're all working on projects that DOT, we can be a good partner on. So we've prepared that letter. I will let the committee members know. We didn't put a ton of detail in the letter besides requesting the meeting because we're not sure, obviously, A, how much money we want to request yet. We obviously know it will be for operations. We do know that will be recurring, but A, how much money is it going to be, and probably more importantly, what will those dollars be spent on? So I think we're now working with David and Debbie and others to try to figure out what that number will look like. It needs to be some type of a recurring source, or it has to be coming out of a pot of money that's not going to impact other DOT work plans, especially non-recurring work plans in the region. I know that the TMA group yesterday and other groups have taken a position of let's not try to come up with non-recurring revenue dollars that's going to impact some of our other transit agency partners. And so I think that's something that we're mindful of, and I know that TBARTA is mindful of, and that's something we're going to continue to work for, is making sure that whatever dollars we come up with in Tallahassee doesn't impact current projects in the region. So as you all know, election was on Tuesday. There's a handful of competitive seats in the Tampa Bay area. Nothing to report at this point to you. Most of the open seats will be decided once we get to November. I will tell you, as we're kind of developing the strategy for funding in Tallahassee, our attention now will turn to meeting with not only DOT, but also incoming Senate President Simpson and also incoming Speaker Chris Sprouse, and having conversations with those as well. And we're in the process of setting up those meetings. We wanted to kind of do the DOT meeting first to kind of get an idea of what direction we want to go there, and then we'll set up meeting with House and Senate leadership. So I will pause there and see if anybody has any questions.
Hey, Ron, Rich
Thank
McClain.
you, Ron, very much for your update. Any questions for Ron this morning on a state legislative agenda or other topics of interest?
Yeah, Chair Rich McClain.
Recognize Rich. Yes,
Okay.
sir.
Hey, Ron, you spoke kind of vaguely about a timeline. Do you have any kind of idea of what a real good timeline is to start working our state representatives?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Rich. And we're having this client with a lot of other. We're having this conversation with a number of other clients as well. So let me remind everybody, we go back to a traditional calendar this year where session starts in March. So March and April, which means committee weeks start in January and February. By the way, we're not even sure what committee weeks are going to look like right now. There's all kinds of rumors floating around. One of the rumors, by the way, is the House and Senate would do alternate weeks in Tallahassee. House would come in for a week and then Senate would come in the following week to kind of stagger a little bit. The punchline is we'd really like to have a plan by January, but I'd like to have something in place where we can have conversations with DOT and probably House and Senate leadership over the next couple of months, and really use November and December to start working some of our legislative, our ball delegation, to make sure they kind of know what our plan is. And we have a, kind of a plan of attack and strategy going into January to work from a committee standpoint. I will tell you, the most important, there's three really important people as a part of this discussion. A is the governor's office and DOT, making sure that they're on board in whatever direction we're trying to go, making sure there's no surprises there with the strategy we're going to come up with. And obviously House and Senate leadership being from the Tampa Bay area will be critical.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Ron. The reason I ask is, for me, it's always the sooner the better. And And as soon as we can start, doing a couple little either face-to-face or however we're going to do a video, that would be good as we prep for our real ask. So.
Absolutely. Thank you, sir. We'll do that for sure.
I had to step away for a second. Did you say when and if they're coming back together to make any adjustments to the budget from last year?
Right now, we're hearing there's no plans for a special session. If there will be a special session, the earliest it would be is after the November elections. The governor has been consistent over the last 2 weeks saying that he believes at this point there's enough money in reserves and federal dollars to not have the need for a special session. With that being said, I know there's some people that do believe if the revenue estimates continue to worsen at this point, I think there may be an opportunity for them. If they do a special session, my guess is it would probably piggyback on, a November or excuse me, a December committee week, or maybe even a January committee week to make those adjustments.
I have a question that isn't related to TBARTA, but the governor, it's about Sadowski Trust Fund money. So he didn't sweep it, but he didn't fill it, right? He's holding it. Do you know what he's going to do with that?
Natalie, you may be able to better answer that than I can.
So what the governor did was there was a $225 million sale appropriation line item. He vetoed that. Those dollars, because they come from a trust fund, will revert back to the trust fund and will sit whole in the trust fund itself. The dollars that would have otherwise been spent to fully fund the affordable housing programming, he drew down $250,000 from the CARES funding to backfill that. So it was a very creative approach in ensuring that the current affordable housing needs were funded, but holding those $225 million in reserve, in a sense, within the trust fund for next year. So at this point, the coalition, in which we're a part of because we represent other folks that do Sadowski issues, we're very happy with the approach that the governor took, because now those dollars next year, as revenues coming in are diminishing, we still have those dollars to work on future projects. There's always the concern, because the big advocacy around Sadowski has been to stop the sweeps, because as has been the past, they go in and they sweep the funds out to general revenue. So now that the funds are there, they are still kind of out there to be swept. But as far as we're concerned, the governor has a commitment to keeping that trust fund whole.
Well, we were supposed to get $6 million this year. We've got 0. So are we going to get anything?
Well, you'll need to talk with your team, because there are CARES funds that can be drawn down. So I don't know how
we cannot build housing with that money. It can be used for temporary shelter, but you can't build a physical structure, unfortunately. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I can talk to you offline.
Okay.
Thank you, Natalie. Thank you, Ron. Any other questions for Ron or Natalie from executive members or the board? Thank you again. Excellent update. I'd like to move to David Green in our discussion items. David, next item is State Government Relations and Lobbying Services. You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Back in October of 2018, the board approved a contract with RSA Consulting Group for state government relations and lobbying services. And then in August of 2019, the board awarded a second contract to continue services for another year. And both of those contracts were approved via a piggybacking arrangement through a contract that PSTA already had in place with RSA. PSTA exercised its final option with RSA on June 22nd of this year for a final term of 1 year. And TBARTA remains eligible to piggyback from that agreement. So we would like to take the same approach as in the previous 2 years to continue services for one final contract year. Our recommendation is to award a final 1-year contract to RSA Consulting Group for an amount of $8,500 a month to be funded by local contributions. And Mr. Chair, before I turn it back over to you, I would like to share, for the sake of full disclosure, that the Hillsborough Board of County Commissioners passed a motion a few weeks ago preventing TBARTA from using any of its local contribution on lobbying services, which sounds scary, but it really doesn't have any effect on TBARTA at all, as long as funding from all the other counties remains intact. As a reminder, the total local contribution amount is $550,000 from all 5 counties. Hillsborough's portion is just under $223,000, which leaves a balance of $327,000 from the other 4 counties. The 2 lobbying contracts that we've got in place for next year, the state contract with RSA and the federal contract with Van Scoyoc, amount to a total of $179,000. So we still have enough local contributions from those other counties to cover the cost of our lobbying contracts, and still have almost $150,000 still left over from those other counties.
Thank you, David.
Mr.
Any
Chair,
first questions for David?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
this is Commissioner Long. I'd like to speak to that issue that David just spoke about for a moment, if I may. And I'm sorry I got on late today because we have our leadership policy group meeting at 8 o'clock with regard to our emergency situation here in the county. So that said, you know, Hillsborough County is part of TBARTA because of a mandate in our statute. And a partner is a partner. And I feel very strongly that this is not an exercise in good faith when that kind of a decision is made. And I can give you a very strong example for why I feel that way. I've been on PSTA as a board member for 7 years. It'll be 8 in November. And that said, I can tell you that it has taken that entire amount of time for us to obtain the $21.8 million from the Federal Transit Authority that was awarded to us a month ago. That is a really big deal, not only for our county, but for our entire region, because as all of you know, that is the catalyst project for our 41-mile plan that we have to connect our region together. So I'm not certain what their thought process is or what their knowledge is about what a legislative advocacy or lobbyist person does. Somehow for them, it seems to connote a bad word. But that said, we are all elected, a lot of us are elected officials in our own communities, and we cannot spend 60 days in Tallahassee educating the members of the legislature about TBARTA and why it exists. And we certainly cannot spend, you know, weeks after week after week in Washington, D.C. So if we don't have these folks to educate, to explain, to answer questions, I don't know how Hillsborough County thinks they're ever going to improve their transportation system, not only within their own county, but certainly throughout the region. So it doesn't seem fair to me. It may not seem like a lot of money right now, but everybody benefits when we work together. And I think it's worth more discussion on that issue. That's my thought process, and I welcome anybody else's opinion.
Yes, this is Commissioner
Thank you,
Starkey.
Commissioner Long. Yes, recognized.
Who is? Who'd you recognize?
Commissioner Starkey.
Okay, thanks.
Commissioner Starkey.
So I spoke about this. I don't even remember what meeting it was recently, but I'm dismayed that they took that vote. And I feel that we need to speak to the Hillsborough County Commission at a public meeting, maybe. Well, I don't know, maybe privately, maybe publicly, but in group to, you know, they have a representative who who knows what is being told to the group. And I'm very concerned that they keep staking off on Hillsborough County keeps going off on in an individual manner and not having their regional hat on. And I think it would be interesting if we went to a meeting and spoke about the importance of regionalism in a public way. It's kind of my thought. And that's what I'm thinking.
Yes, I had a question for you, David, as it relates to this item. Can we get the actual discussion, motions, conversations from the minutes that occurred to make that decision and get it to our committee members, board members that are interested? I'd like the background on their thoughts. It'd be interesting.
Absolutely. I'm sure we can dig that up from the board meeting. And I guess to give it a little bit more context, the motion came as TBARTA was presenting the Regional Transit Development Plan and Vision 2030 to the Hillsborough Board of County Commissioners. You may recall that once we approved that plan and adopted it, we then had to present to the CCC and to each of the 5 partner counties. So it was during the course of that presentation and after we finished. You may also recall Commissioner Kemp has made comments in the past related to earmarks. And I believe her thought is that by TBARTA paying state lobbyists to advocate for recurring funds from the general state operating budget, she thinks that we're actually lobbying for earmarks, which could potentially pull funds away from HART, which she feels are obviously desperately needed for local HART projects in Hillsborough County. But we can certainly get those comments for you from their minutes.
And I wasn't directly involved in the conversation before the board, but I'm assuming they have lobbyists that go to Tallahassee to try to get things done in Hillsborough County. We've kind of been separated out from that group and targeted for this specific item. No lobbying for TBARTA only. I mean, it's not a countywide policy or anything.
No, it's not.
Hey, Chair Rich McLean.
Other members recognize Rich McLean.
Okay. Hey, thank you, Chair.
Go ahead, Rich.
As the HART member to TBARTA, I would like to also recommend along the same lines that Commissioner Long and Commissioner Starkey mentioned. I think it would be very beneficial for us to meet as a group with the HART board and talk through this a little bit. I believe it was mentioned that Commissioner Kemp has been against using these funds for lobbyists for various reasons. Some of those don't make sense to me either, to be frankly honest with you. But I would recommend along the same lines as I mentioned with Commissioner Long, Commissioner Starkey, that we try to organize some sort of meeting with the board to talk through this, because as Commissioner Long mentioned, while this is not directly impacting us right now, it could definitely in the future as we look to use those funds in other manners. And so having us hamstrung like that, and I mean us, me and Team BARTA, is kind of detrimental, I think, to our future growth. So I would recommend we do that also. If I recall with that vote, it wasn't a unanimous vote. So there should be some players there that support and understand what we're doing, and hopefully they are using lobbyists just like we are. And as Commissioner Long mentioned, they are drastically needed because we cannot be up in DC or Tallahassee 24/7 to do the kind of work they do for us. So I recommend it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other committee members, board members? Recognize Chairman Holton.
Thank you, Chair.
Yes, sir.
I'd like to just amplify the comments already made, and I think it's important as well that David potentially meet with each especially after the election, each county commissioner in Hillsborough County to explain exactly what the goals and ideas of TBARTA are. Some of them might not be completely informed, again, by their representative on our board. And I think it's very important that as a public relations and a conciliatory gesture that we reach out to all of them individually to make clear what our mission is and how we all benefit from regionalism as opposed to trying to be competitive in this issue. I think that, as has been said many times, we're going to get more done collaboratively as a community than as an individual county or city or whatever, and moving forward with these vital projects. So I wholeheartedly endorse re-upping the contract, but I think it's important that we do some public relations cover work as well going forward to try to get the majority of the Hillsborough County Commission back online with our efforts.
And Chair, just one more comment.
Holden, yes, sir. You're recognized.
Just keep in mind, board members, that Hart just recently had a board officer change. Commissioner Smith is now our chair. Les Miller is no longer the chair, but still an active board member. Just wanted to make that point for those who know Commissioner Smith, of course, as we go forward and start working these conversations. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Any comments? This is an action item, so I'm going to need a motion and a second to move forward David's agenda for renewing our contract with RSA.
I'll make a motion to renew the contract with RSA.
Second, Commissioner Starkey.
Have a motion from Commissioner Long and a second by Commissioner Starkey. Any further discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Chair, this is Alan Zimmerman. I just want to make
Yes.
it clear. This is a recommendation. The final decision will need to be made by the board, the full board.
Right. Is that clear in the motion, Commissioner Long?
Yes.
Recommendation to the board.
To move it to the board.
Yes, sir. Roll call.
Cliff Manuel,
Yes.
Jim Holton,
Yes.
Commissioner Long,
Yes.
Commissioner Mitten, Commissioner Starkey,
Yes.
Rich McLean.
Yes.
Okay, motion passes 5-0.
Thank you. I'd like to continue with you, David Green. I think you have another action or another item of this on the letter for DOT that we put together for the committee's consideration and ultimately the board's approval. You're recognized.
Yes, thank you again, Mr. Chair. So this is the follow-up item from last month, and Ron kind of teed this up already in his updates, but there was a conversation last month for staff to develop a letter to FDOT related to our need for recurring funds. So we drafted a letter and I subsequently distributed it to Legislative Committee for review. The approach, as Ron indicated, was to request a meeting with Secretary Thibault to have a conversation about, what the needs are and what the possibilities are, and try to have a two-way conversation instead of us just simply going in with a specific request. So just provided that to you all for feedback and any revisions or comments before we actually approved it and mailed it.
Mr. Chair, this is Commissioner Long.
You're recognized, Commissioner Long.
Thank you. In the spirit of full disclosure, I wanted to share with a legislative committee, and I've also had the conversation with Ron, that I did have an opportunity to have a chat with Secretary Gwynn at our Sunrunner groundbreaking, where we actually launched the construction of our Sunrunner line, about this issue with regard to recurring funding. And given that the state is facing a $5.4 billion deficit, It seems unlikely in reality, though we can certainly try, that we are going to get a dedicated revenue source in this legislative session. And it appears to me, and I've discussed it with Ron, that we would be better served by trying to have an in-depth conversation with Secretary Gwynn about ways in which we could carve out the dollars that we need from Secretary Gwynn's District 7 budget. Because, you know, that has been done in the past with other transportation lines throughout the state of Florida. And true, it wouldn't be a source of funds forever, but it would give us some breathing room to get us over the next 4 or 5 years. At least that was my thought from having been a former legislator. And I can look to Ron to weigh in on that type of strategy. So while it's great to send a letter to the secretary, I think our energy is better served by working with our local secretary. And you can chime in, Ron, if you think I'm wrong.
Mr. Chair and Commissioner Long, no, I completely agree. And, you know, Secretary Gwynn sitting here and, you know, I think, you know, he needs to be a big part of that discussion moving forward. I know this has been done in other parts of the state. And as I said in my earlier remarks, I think going after a recurring funding in this type of a budget environment makes it very difficult. So if there's a way to come up with a short-term solution that, you know, is a, you know, 3-5 year commitment that allows us to get beyond these bad budget years, and more importantly, maybe get farther along on what the 41-mile BRT project looks like and other projects that we possibly could partner with DOT and get funding out of being part of those projects. So I think that's a great strategy moving forward to be part of that discussion.
And if I might follow up, Mr. Chair, part of that discussion, I do believe, would benefit from us sitting down with a very thoughtful, short and long range strategic plan about what we do think that our needs are going to be going forward in terms of actually, quote unquote, getting things done. And I look forward in our next meeting of the Finance Committee to talking about that a little more in depth and thoroughly. So thank you for allowing me to just express my thoughts. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Long. Secretary Gwynn, you've been a part of the conversation. Would you like to add anything for the committee to consider?
So not a whole lot to add. I'll tell you right now, we are digesting the Revenue Estimating Conference's projections. And sometime probably in September or early October, we'll get our allocations, which means it'll more or less update what we have in our 5-year plan. We are anticipating that we're going to see a reduction. We don't know how significant. We also anticipate that we may be looking at other ways to fill some of those gaps. It may be an opportunity to look at certain types of bonding or other financing. But once all that's digested and we have it into a better idea of what we're working with, we'll probably then be able to take a look at how we spend the money. So I guess what I'm saying is I would doubt over the next 2 to 3 months that you'll be able to get much of an answer from, especially from central office, as far as what might be available to use for other purposes. We're going to be probably looking to try to keep ourselves from having to delay or defer things that we've already got in the program. So that's not to say we can't find something. Maybe we can. In the past, I think we've shown that where we can find money, whether it be the commuter assistance grant money, whether it be the $5 million that we were able to get for the PD&E study, those things we certainly look for opportunities. The operating funds are a little more difficult. But I guess long and short, what I'm saying is I think it's going to probably be 2 to 3 months before we have a really good handle on what we might be able to do. We're gonna have to spend some time looking at our work program over the next few months.
Thank you, Secretary Gwynn. Any other comments related to this subject? I had a quick question, Secretary Gwynn, as we're visiting about it with your office. I don't see any downside in completing our letter, getting the board to approve it and send it out. I mean, continuing to request doesn't mean that none of us believe it's not difficult to accomplish, but it seems like we should stay front and center on the subject.
Yeah,
Well,
when I had my discussion with Secretary Tebow, I think what he was hoping to get was, certainly he'll meet with you if the request is to meet. I think he was hoping to get a little more information on what you may be wanting to ask for, so that when that meeting occurs, we'll have had a time ahead of time to look into what options may be available and be able to get the right people involved. Because just having a meeting, typically what will happen if you go to that meeting, there'll be a discussion, but it probably won't be it won't be as productive as if you were to throw out some of your ideas or thoughts in advance of the meeting so that they can prepare for that.
I think that's still a good strategy, David. I don't see any reason backing out of that thought process from my perspective. I'd like to get the committee's input. Again, I think this is an action item. You said we're going to send out the letter, but we still need the board to review it as well. Correct, David? The DOT letter.
I thought this conversation was from the legislative subcommittee as opposed to the full board, but if your preference is to send the letter to the full board, we can certainly do that. The draft letter is not in the full board packet for other board members to review. So it's because of that, I don't think it's anything the board could take action on today.
Well, if I may, Mr. Chair, I'm not quite certain why this type of a letter needs to go to the full board. The full board is not involved in our legislative strategy. And Secretary Gwynn's words were music to my ears, because I think that is exactly what the full board needs to have more thoughtfulness and vision on, with regard to exactly what is it that our needs are and what is our short and long-term strategy to achieve the goals that we have set forth. And I'll talk more about that very briefly in our finance committee meeting. So thank you.
With that said, then this is a committee, legislative committee recommendation and letter sent to the state. I think we've all had a chance to review it. I know I have. If it's acceptable to the committee, we'll send the letter out as David has indicated. And if there's no issues for that happening legally, then I have no problems with supporting it.
So I would recommend that we send the letter ASAP.
Agree.
Is there any members that are opposed to sending out the letter on behalf of the legislative committee? And Alan, do I need a vote of any kind on this, or can we do it by consensus?
You can do it by consensus, since David is the one signing the letter. He doesn't need formal approval. I think he's just trying to get a consensus to the language of the letter.
Looks fine to
I'm
me.
fine with it.
I think you've got a green light. I'm sorry, was someone wanting to be recognized?
This was Commissioner
Consensus,
Starkey.
you're good to go.
Okay.
Oh, go ahead, Commissioner Starkey.
I was just saying I'm good with the letter.
Thank you. All right, is there any committee members that are not good with the letter? All right, David, thank you. I don't think, let's see, where am I on my agenda? Other business, any other business to come before the committee? And are there any future meeting topics that we need to consider while we're on this item?
Well, this is Commissioner Starkey. If we
Commissioner
want
Starkey,
to,
recognized.
yes, so if we want to speak to the either Hart Board or Hillsborough County Board in a group, I think we should have a strategy and discuss how we do that. at some point.
Well, Mr.
I
Chair,
think
could
we
we,
will pick.
could we,
Go
do-
ahead,
could,
Commissioner Long.
could we have that discussion maybe with David and let him and Ron figure that out? Because we are 15 minutes late starting our finance committee. And those issues we have to discuss are really important before our board meeting starts. I'd just like to bring that to your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Long. I think it is a strategy we can have. I mean, I personally would support going through Hart first. I think that conversation should be had. But David, we'll let you work on that for us and put it together. I think it's a great idea to pursue. With that, we'll adjourn the overtime legislative committee and move on to the next committee item. Thank you.
Thank you. And I do believe that as chair of the finance committee, do we have everybody here, Jennifer, that we need in order to move right into the finance committee?
Yes, we do.
Okay, great. Then I'd like to open up the finance committee meeting with post haste and get right to it if there's no public comment to be had.
Commissioner Long, we do not have anybody on the line for public comment at this time.
Thank you so much. All right, we have a consent agenda item that includes the finance committee meeting.
Commissioner, we do need
Yes.
to take roll call before we start the meeting.
I'm sorry?
You do need to take roll call before we start the meeting.
I do apologize to you, Jennifer. It's a little
Okay.
difficult. I can't see everybody. So how about you do the roll since you probably have it in front of you?
Yes, ma'am. I did want to let everybody know ahead of time that we do not have Commissioner Mitten or Bellamy during this meeting, so I will go ahead. Jim Holton,
Here.
Cliff Manuel,
Present.
Commissioner Long,
Present.
Rich McLean,
Present.
and Commissioner Starkey.
Present.
Okay, we can go ahead and proceed. We do have a quorum.
Terrific. Thank you. Could I have a motion, please, to approve the finance committee meeting from minutes from July?
Move to approve the minutes.
Second, Rich McLean.
Been motioned and seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Again, we do have to take another roll call. I apologize. With Zoom World, we have a roll call for every action that's taken.
Oh my goodness.
I know. So let me go ahead and start calling that roll call for you. Jim Holton,
Yes.
Cliff Manuel,
Yes.
Commissioner Long,
Yes.
Rich McLean,
Yes.
and Commissioner Starkey.
Yes.
Okay, motion
Thank
passes
you.
5-0.
Thank you very much. Before Melanie gives the discussion on the financials, I wanted to make you all aware, and I don't know if you saw the memo that I sent to David on August 10th, but it seemed appropriate to me, given the state of our governmental budgets and the pandemic and the governor's veto and the dedicated revenue stream that we need for TBARTA, that we take a deep dive into the mission of TBARTA, what our objectives have been since the beginning, and become very strategic in our decision-making as we move forward. In reviewing the financial history since 2017, I think most of you know I've been on TBARTA for quite some time. The past 5 years of the operating budget expenses have troubled me greatly, and I think I've spoken to it many times as we have continued to grow. But our operating expenses have increased by 414%. While I recognize that a portion of these dollars has been the result of mandates from the state legislature in terms of what they wanted us to do, as usual, they put all these things in place and then they don't provide revenue to accomplish them. So it appears that we continue to focus on doing studies, which is another big gripe of mine. When our board has indicated on more than one occasion that we wanted to focus on getting things done for our citizens. So in an effort to be a responsible elected official, I thought it would be important to share the financial history of TBARTA with the board. And I apologize, I don't have the little chart that I put into the memo that I sent. And I'm happy to send you this memo if you would all like to receive it. So while we have the $2.2 million from the CARES Act, which can be used to plug our holes through 2021, I would like to know from David what the plan is that, gets us moving forward, especially given the Hillsborough action, which we've already discussed, which says that they don't want any of the local dollars to be used on lobbying or advocating. And I'd like to know how that affects the other partners, because we have several counties represented here. And we've already had the discussion about asking Hillsborough to rethink their decision and why. I've had the discussion with our county administrator, and he has been meeting with the new county administrator over in Hillsborough. And perhaps through her, we have a better opportunity to help to redirect a more regional thinking for Hillsborough County. We're in the process now in our local governments of crafting our FY21 budgets with a very big focused eye on the projections for 2022. So we know that we're setting aside dollars in the reserve that we can pull should we need them in 2022, which is when the local governments will be most severely impacted by the coronavirus. And I'd like to thank David and Melanie, because after they received my memo, they were very, very good about coming forward with some recommendations about what they plan to do. And I think it would be also prudent to remind you all of the purpose for why we created the Memorandum of Understanding with PSTA. And it was precisely so that we could help to keep the operating expenses of TBARTA very low while we moved forward to get really big things done. And it isn't lost on me that this is a legislative mandate. So with that said, I'll open it up for David and Melanie to present the budget, the real budget. David, you want to do it, or you want Melanie to do it?
Commissioner Long, I hate to interrupt, but we do have the order going with the financials first, the government relations contract with RSA, and then the budget last. So if you certainly are the chair and you can change that order, but I just wanted to let you know what the agenda was stating.
I have the agenda right in front of me, Jennifer.
Okay.
I appreciate your reminding me. That said, 15 minutes of my time as the finance committee have been taken up by the legislative discussion. So it doesn't matter to me. I'm just trying to get through the really critical stuff that needs to be discussed before our board meeting starts. And we did just go ahead. So what is the pleasure of the rest of the group? Hello?
Whatever's your pleasure. Let's just try to, I would prefer to get through it in the most important order of things.
Yes, you already laid out the preamble to this, so let's move on with it with this.
All right,
So,
Melanie, you're up.
I'll go ahead and kick it off, Commissioner Long, if you don't mind, and for the rest of the group, just to give you a little bit more background. So we presented you all a draft operating budget last month. And after having additional conversations with Commissioner Long, and she already had mentioned the memo that she sent a couple of weeks ago, Melanie and I and Debbie got together. We took a look at the budget and we made some revisions. You know, one of the biggest requests was to take a harder look at the budget and make some adjustments where we could in order to reduce the operating expenses where we were able to. So the budget that we have in front of you today is different than what was presented to you last month. It is actually lower by, I believe, around $600,000, but I will let Melanie take it over and go through the rest of the budget with you all.
Thank you, David. So just reiterating what David said, we did last month, we included in the budget, we had the initial draft. Since then, within a month, we had some discussions and we worked on revising the budget to really take a look at what the operations needs were for next year. We were able to identify some of those areas we could reduce. Some of those areas that do include the marketing campaign. We're able to look at that and see what our needs were for next year regarding that. Also, we took a look at the personnel that includes the benefits. We actually looked and see what employees were actually electing as far as their benefit package, and we were able to take a closer look and get that actual number. And then the last, we took a look at some of the consulting expenses related to the new study, so we were able to reduce that. So with all these changes, we did from the initial budget to the final budget that you see here today, we were able to bring it from $7.4 million to $6.6 million. And this was approximately about an $800,000 decrease, which is about 11% from the initial budget to the final budget that you see today. In addition, compared to the FY20 budget to the FY21 budget that you see here, it's about $900,000 less than the FY20 budget, which is approximately about 12%. So our intent here today was to present this final draft to the board for approval for the FY 2021 budget. So that was pretty much our thought process over the last.
Comments, anyone? Questions? No? Well, all right then. So do we want to take a vote on the budget to move it forward to the board?
Sure, I'll make that motion to move the budget forward to the board, Commissioner Starkey.
Thank you.
Second, Rich McLean.
All those in favor, I guess Jennifer wants to take the roll.
Correct. Jim Holton,
Yes.
Manuel,
Yes.
Commissioner Long,
Yes.
Rich McLean,
Yes.
and Commissioner Starkey.
Yes.
Okay, motion passes 5-0.
All right. Let's talk about the state government relations and lobbying services. I think everyone here also heard the legislative conversation, and that was discussed, and there was a recommendation made by the legislative committee to move it forward. So is there anyone here that objects to moving this to the full board? No?
Nope.
And then do we need a motion and a second, and everybody roll call again?
Yes.
Commissioner Starkey, can I ask a question on that lobbying contract?
Sure.
And that I'm just wondering, and I'm sorry if I had to step away when I first came on, if you discussed this, but what are the legalities of directing how and where your money is spent when it's given to TBARTA?
Well, this is Ellensman. There's nothing that requires Hillsborough County, first of all, to contribute any money to TBARTA. It's each county has the option to contribute money. They've decided to contribute money, so there's certainly nothing that prevents them from essentially attaching strings to how that money can be used.
Alan, I thought that was part of the mandate from the legislature. They're not partners, I mean, with no obligation.
There's nothing in the legislation that requires a specific local contribution from each county.
Does it require local participation?
Participation on the board in
Yes.
the operation, but it doesn't require
Now that's
participation
interesting.
monetarily.
That is very interesting, and that is something that I certainly was not aware of. Is Ron still on the call? I can't see him.
He appears to be. He's muted, but
Yes, ma'am, I'm still here.
So going back to my comments, I'm very uncomfortable that you can contribute to a regional board with strings attached to how your money is spent. And I think that's something in the policies that we need to fix.
I agree. Ron, do you have any input here? This is important for our legislative folks to hear.
Yeah, and again, I completely agree. Obviously, Hillsborough County and all the counties that are mentioned have a seat at the table to be on TBARTA's board. But to Alan's point, there's nothing currently today in statute that requires them to financially commit any dollars directly to TBARTA.
Well, what is the pleasure of the Finance Committee then? You're awfully quiet this morning,
Well,
Kathryn.
I'll go back to the microphone. So I'm not sure this is a finance committee discussion, might be a policy committee discussion, but I think that we need to work on our bylaws, and I would kind of turn to the attorney and other board members if they feel like I do, that you should not be able to cherry pick where you want your funds spent when you're a member of an organization. I've never seen that before, ever. And Commissioner Long, have you?
No, I haven't. And I don't sit on any other boards where there isn't some fiduciary responsibility. I mean, what on earth are you on a board for if you're not there to support what the mission is? And we've known from the beginning, this is another huge issue that we've had since the beginning. So I don't really know how you correct that.
Well, if we don't have Hillsborough on board, the whole thing unravels anyway. So maybe we just have to lay our cards on the table and make sure that they're willing to be part of a regional effort. And by changing our policies, by saying, one, there has to be a financial commitment, and two, you cannot control where that commitment is spent. Anybody. And
hey, Ron, Rich McLean. Or Ron and Alan, I should ask, as a chair of the policy committee, I hear this coming, but I don't think we can establish fiduciary responsibility. I thought that had to come down from the legislation.
Yes, and I was trying to get Commissioner Long's attention. The TBARTA board can't establish or place a requirement on any of the counties to contribute money or to limit or to prevent them from limiting how the money can be used. We can do one of two things. We can either ask the legislature to include something in the act that created TBARTA that required the 5 counties to contribute without limitation on the use of the money, or we could seek, the only thing we could do as TBARTA is to seek an interlocal agreement amongst the 5 counties to establish a method for contribution and prohibiting any limitation on the use of the funds. And that way we would have an ongoing agreement amongst the counties that all agreed to contribute and established a method for determining the amount of the contribution year to year. The benefit for us, obviously, is we don't need to go ask each year to get approval from each county for their contribution if we could get an interlocal agreement amongst the 5 counties. So for example, Hart has an interlocal agreement between all of the member governments in their organization for how they contribute yearly to the operations of Hart. The city of Tampa, Temple Terrace, and Hillsborough County have an interlocal agreement, provide local funding to Hart year to year. So we could try to do the same thing with our 5 counties. That's the only thing we could do ourselves. Otherwise, it would require an act of the legislature.
Hey, Alan, just to continue that conversation, I was under the understanding that we already had that letter of agreement. Because obviously we have some kind of form where they're paying a certain amount of money, and it's different between each county based on where they get their revenues from. So I thought we had something that established
I did too.
that already.
I don't believe we have a formalized interlocal agreement. I believe we have.
Well, then
some
how
kind of
did they come up
informal-
with the formula, Alan? There's a formula for how the dollars are out, or, you know.
I believe we have an informal agreement. Maybe David could speak to that in the formula. I think there's an informal understanding, but it's never been formalized into an interlocal agreement. And that informal understanding is that requires each year for each county to authorize the contribution to TBARTA.
Correct. There is no agreement, formal or informal. It is simply a request that TBARTA makes to the partner counties every year, which they contribute on a voluntary basis. So if, for example, Pinellas County decided in any particular year that they just didn't want to contribute that time, they have that ability. There is nothing in place requiring any partner county to contribute whatsoever. But the methodology is in place, and that is based on total population percentage.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
I mean, legislative approaches to these types of problems, I guess it's always in your back pocket. It should not be in your front pocket. I think we should follow Alan's lead and try to formalize our relationships with the counties. I think it would provide a lot of benefit for discussion with member counties. I think we could outline in the agreements the things we would like to accomplish and see them vested in, year after year. And thinking through it, I think that type of contract relationship with the member counties, assuming it's successful, would also be beneficial in our legislative ask for reoccurring funding. Thank you.
Yeah, I would, the Rich McLean again, I would agree with Cliff in the way forward. I thought we had established LOAs out there. I think if we don't have that, we're on a very slippery slope. And if any one of those 5 counties decides to pull out, then as somebody mentioned before, I could see a lot of this slipping away. So I would say that we need to do that.
Chair Long, can I comment as well?
Of course.
Yeah, I am going to, I'm going to agree with that. I think a heavy-handed approach by going to the legislature to mandate something like this is just going to further exacerbate tensions with Hillsborough County. And I think the best way is through, spice and not vinegar here. Let's get everyone at the table that has a seat at the table and discuss the best way to approach this and try to get a consensus on regionalism, as opposed to forcing something down someone in this type of situation, especially given the fiscal crisis that all of the counties in the area and the state are facing right now. So I think part and parcel of this nice approach of going out with a public relations campaign on what we do, let's try to get some consensus on regionalism. And part and parcel of that is an interlocal agreement with Alan and David's lead to get everyone on board. So there's no issue coming up each year that this county, if they're a member of TBARTA, is going to contribute or not contribute. And that way, we're all transparent and have a seat at the table and have negotiated something rather than going through the back door of the legislature to force them to mandate a policy on TBARTA.
Well said. Anything else? Anyone? All right. So where does that leave us then?
I think right now, Madam Chair, you have a motion and a second to move forward to the board the approval of continuing the relationship with RSA on the State Government Relations and Lobbying Services Agreement. I believe we had
I did not get a motion or a second yet.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought we had a motion.
Okay.
So that's the item you're on. You need a motion and a second.
Move to approve the contract.
Second.
Thank you, everybody. Jennifer, do you want to call the roll?
Yes, ma'am. Jim Holton,
Yes.
Cliff Manuel,
Yes.
Commissioner Long,
Yes.
Rich McLean,
Yes.
and Commissioner Starkey.
Yes.
Okay, motion passes 5-0.
Thank you. And then the approval of the fiscal year 2021 budget. Is there any further discussion on that? We've talked about it a bit already.
I thought we
Seeing no,
voted on that, no?
Yeah.
I thought we did too, but I'm just, the format for this this meeting is a lot different from any other board that I sit on, and there are a lot of them. And I'm curious, Alan, I don't sit on any other board where we have to take roll call votes after every item. We take our votes, but everybody raises their hand and verbally says their vote. We don't do roll call.
The problem, Commissioner, is we have some people that are appearing without video, and it's hard for Jennifer to know, and some people are coming and leaving the meeting. So it's hard for Jennifer to make sure that she's aware who is actually on the meeting and who is voting. So
Even when they say their name? Even when they say their name? I'm just saying, it's a lot of time. Okay, well, I'm not going to belabor it. We can talk about that later. Are we doing a roll, Jennifer, or what are we doing here?
We've already taken the vote on that and it did pass 5-0. So the next
Okay,
item is just going over the financials from July.
Do we want to go over the financials from July? I thought we had already done that too, but maybe apparently Jennifer thinks we haven't. Anybody? Okay. Do we have any other business to discuss? If not, then our next finance committee meeting is September 25th at 9 a.m. And we are adjourned. All right.
Good meeting, Commissioner Long.
I tried to keep it so we'd be done at 9:30. I apologize.
I'll put us back on time.
I'm sure.
If I can get ahead and call to order the policy committee meeting for 21 August 2020. Jennifer, if you can do a roll call, please.
Rich McLean,
Present.
Jim Holton,
Here.
Cliff Manuel,
Present.
and Commissioner Starkey.
Present.
Okay, again, we do have Commissioners Mitten and Bellamy out, but we do have a quorum. You can proceed.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Jennifer. Cindy, do we have any public comments?
Good morning. We do not have anyone on the line for public comment at this time.
Okay, thank you, Cindy. So we'll move on to item 3, consent agenda, and that's for the July policy committee meetings. Do I have a motion in a second?
Move to approve.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, go ahead, Cliff.
Okay, thank you. Jennifer, we have a motion in a second. Can we do a roll?
Yes, sir. Rich McLean,
Yes.
Jim Holton,
Yes.
Cliff Manuel,
Yes.
and Commissioner Starkey.
Yes.
Okay, motion passes 4-0.
Okay, Jennifer, thank you. We'll go on to item 4, which is our discussion and action items. We do have one action item, that's item A, and so we'll make sure we cover that. If we don't have enough time to go into B, we'll move forward smartly. But item A is it's an MCAP for Route 99 within Manatee County. It's on Route 41. It goes from Bradenton to Sarasota. I want to turn this over to Chris so he can speak about it. So Chris, you got a minute there.
Yes, thank you. Christine Untis, TBARTA staff. This item is a resolution of support for Manatee County Area Transit and their service development grant to make frequency improvements throughout 99. The Route 99 serves from downtown Bradenton to downtown Sarasota along US 41 and serves the airport, colleges, and commercial and retail along US 41. The grant was submitted to FDOT. The grant will fund operating costs in the amount of $1.5 million for frequency improvements from 30 minutes to every 20 minutes. Their service need is the top service priority in MCAT's adopted TDP. The Route 99 expansion is one of the top priorities in TBARTA's recently adopted Envision 2030. The service is one of the highest ranked proposals in Sarasota Manatee MPO LRTP. The capital needs are funded for the 4 buses, and staff recommends advancing this resolution to TBARTA board for approval. That concludes my presentation.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.
And so committee members, all Manatee County Area Transit is asking is our support on this as they move it forward. I think it's a great display for us to go forward with it, but we'll have to get a motion and then a second to move this to the full board for approval.
I move approval.
Okay. Second. Thank you. We have a motion and approval. Jennifer, can you take roll, please?
Jim Holson,
Yes.
Cliff Manuel,
Yes.
Rich McLean,
Yes.
and Commissioner Starkey.
Yes.
Okay, motion passes 4-0.
Okay, so that'll go to the full board. Thank you. We'll move on to item B, and I'm going to let the other Chris jump in here real fast and go through this with a series of slides. As you recall, committee members, this was a discussion we had at the last committee. There were some asks come out of the last committee. I think Chris is addressing most of this. I would still like to have a conversation, keeping in mind we have about 10 minutes before our board meeting. But Chris, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I am conscious of time, so I'll move through this quickly in hopes you have some time to discuss this. As you mentioned, in the last meeting, staff was asked to provide some recommendations on just how we could move forward with the Envision 2030 commitment. The goal being to develop a communication strategy that would build support among our partners to advance our commitment. And there were 3 components to this, 3 essential questions. Who are the partners? Who are the champions? And what is that message going to be? I'm going to spend a little time on it. First of all, when it comes to partners, I think it's important that we clarify a core partner from a partner. If you think about it, we're in partnership with every local entity, every person who resides in our 5-county area, but our core partners are where we want to focus our strategic message. And I've defined them as government organizations that share TBARTA's goal to provide transit service and or transportation support within our 5-county region who can benefit from TBARTA projects. Although each partner has specific needs, TBARTA activities are mutually beneficial to partners. And with that, you can see the core partners I've identified are county commissions, MPOs, transit agencies, and FDOT. As for champions, I've identified champions as a credible individual who supports TBARTA's mission and objectives and works publicly to advance the TBARTA cause. Champions can and should be members of the TBARTA partner organization, but not necessarily. We do need our board members to be champions for us as well. The most effective champions are those who are going to have influential voice that can help TBARTA's goals be realized. The point here is that if our message is on target and adopted, champions are going to emerge, and we're going to need champions at the local levels. And then what I really want to foster some conversation today is about the message that we want to deliver. As you know, we're trying to build support for 2 goals. In the legislative subcommittee, we talked a lot about agency funding, and by agency, I mean TBARTA recurring operating funds. But we also want to find support for project funding, transit projects that benefit the 5-county region. So in building support for Envision 2030, I believe we should be focusing on project funding because there's more opportunity with projects to demonstrate direct benefits to our core partners, and we can identify mutually beneficial project priority funding strategies. With that, I go to my last slide, and this is really cutting to the chase here. Our objectives in these strategies should be benefit all of our individual needs of our core partners. Strategies must pose no harm to our core partners, and then we can go forward and seek some formal support, either through letters of endorsement or perhaps resolutions, to show that we can build a consensus among our region. With that, we have 2 recommendations for you today on the message. Number 1, support increased flexibility of transportation funding in Florida, including reducing allocation of FDOT funding being allocated to road capacity projects on the SIS, that's the Strategic Intermodal System, which is currently 75%. In brief, the SIS is a network of highways and ports and terminals. And right now, the state is obligated to put at least 75%. If we advocate for that number being lowered, we will give the MPOs and the local entities more flexibility. We believe that this recommendation would be embraced by our core partners, specifically at the local level. Number two is to pursue a legislative change in the Florida statutes as listed there. And this has to do with part 4 of that. I won't read that all there, but essentially this relates to the operating funds that go toward rail projects. What we want to do is change one word in this that basically change the word from rail to an intermodal or fixed rail, I should say, a fixed operating, a fixed guideway, I should say, that would allow our RRT project to be funded. This would in no way take funds away from any other existing locality. And we also believe that there would be a great opportunity for us to find some regional consensus and demonstrate that TBARTA is leading the way when it comes to building a regional way forward for transportation. And with that, I will turn it back over to you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. I appreciate that. I want to open up the floor to discussions. Anybody out there? Commissioner Starkey.
Here, I think these are good suggestions, and I would move forward with them.
Yeah, I asked Chris to kind of build these out a little bit, Commissioner Starkey, primarily due to some of the questions you had there on who our core partners are and who our contacts should be. I think with the current elections and all, some of that will, of course, funnel itself through, meaning we'll understand better who is in charge of some of those key areas that we need to touch. And then I asked Chris also to mention, that we have some very influential commissioners right on this board too. And so we want to make sure as we go forward that we have a good message that all board members can move forward with as we work through this. And Chris is in the process of working on that too. So thank you.
I think we have Secretary Gwynn on, and I haven't. And if I recall, he said that at DOT they were looking at I know in the past they always said they don't deal with transit, they're just road building, but I'm wondering where they are on the vision of their transportation thoughts in the future. Maybe he could speak to that.
I'd be glad to address that. I hope I never said we were just roads, because we spend I think 25% of our budget every year on public transportation and other modes.
Yes.
Roads.
Yeah. But I mean not trains.
Well, we do.
Right? You don't do rail.
We did for Sunrail. We do for Tri-Rail. We do have projects. I guess the thing we've been missing in the Tampa region for rail has been the interlocal agreements and commitments to fund long-term operations and maintenance, which they had in Orlando. The challenge right now is Orlando is at the 7 years and they aren't able to take it over. And so they're relooking at how we handle those types of agreements. But what we are looking at is we have by statute that our strategic intermodal system funding, 50% is to be used for road capacity. And we have a policy within the department that it's 75%. What we are actively looking at now, and we have some task teams that are going to be meeting over the next few months to come up with recommendations. Should we take that 75% policy and reduce that so that more money would be available for other modes? The one thing to remember, because when we talk to legislators, sometimes this comes up, is that, for instance, if we decided to go with more money in our district for transit, we would have less money for road widening. And so some of the major road widening projects that are, on the books or that are planned for the future, there would have to be an understanding that if we took a large portion of that towards transit, then we're going to take that away from widening roads. And so it's not like we're going to increase the amount of money total that's available. We're just going to reallocate it a little differently. When you look at Miami, for instance, the folks down there are saying, we just don't have that many more roads to widen. We really do need to invest more in transit. So for them, it's not such a big deal, but in this area, there is still a lot of push for major road widening projects, and we'll just have to find that right balance. But we are looking at that. The second item would require a statute change. Most of you probably know that statute was added specifically at Sunrail. That's where that was added. So it was basically setting it up so that there could be a 7-year of funding for their operations and maintenance. One of the other things we're looking at right now is, should we have something for regional transit where we gradually transfer it over to the locals? For instance, maybe the DOT would fund it for the first year or two, and then the next year it'd be 80% state, 20% local, and gradually move back towards local. So all that's being discussed, and I think within the next few months, we'll be seeing some recommendations coming out of our groups for how to go forward. Other regions like the Panhandle, they may not see transit as being as big of a need, but in Orlando, Tampa, South Florida, that's where we're starting to see more of a need to perhaps shift some of that CIS money to other modes at a larger percent.
Great. I think that bodes well for all of us that you're having these discussions.
Yeah, perfect. And thank you, David, and Commissioner Starkey. That's a great conversation. It sounds like we're pretty much in line with what you're doing, which is good. So Chris, me and you will come back online sometime and talk about the way forward with this. I don't want to belabor this anymore on this call. I think we have about 2 minutes to get us back on track. And so thanks for the discussion. We'll get back to the committee with our way forward, hopefully within the coming week. So I appreciate it. We'll move on to other item 5. Any other business out there? Okay, hearing and seeing none. Our next meeting, I believe it was mentioned, will be September 25th. Correct me if I'm wrong, Jennifer. I believe that's the next meeting.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you very much. Hearing nothing else, I'll go ahead and adjourn this. And Chair, I got you online and on time for your board meeting.
Okay, we've got about 2 minutes, so let's reconvene and at 10 o'clock and we'll start the meeting.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, committee meeting.
Chris, you ready to go?
I'm ready to proceed. If Jennifer is ready to proceed. Jennifer, are you there?
I am.
Okay, welcome everyone. I'll call the meeting to order. Jennifer, please call the roll.
Jim Holton,
Here.
Cliff Manuel,
Present.
Commissioner Long, Commissioner Long, Mayor Jane Castor, Mayor Jane Castor, are you there?
I do not see her logged in.
Mayor Kreisman.
Excuse me, I do see her logged in, but I have not heard from her.
Okay, Mayor Kreisman. Okay, Mayor Kreisman did inform me early this morning that he had a conflict and he was not going to attend. Rich McLean.
Present.
Commissioner Kemp.
Here.
Commissioner Starkey. Commissioner Starkey.
Here. Sorry.
No problem. Again, per the earlier committee meetings, Commissioner Bellamy and Mitten will also not be joining us. Commissioner Seal.
Here.
Okay, so I do need to see if we are have the two people we were missing in order to have quorum, and that would be Commissioner Long and Mayor Castor.
I'm here. Commissioner Long is here.
Okay, and I will try one more time for Mayor Castor. Okay, so we do have 7 at this point, so we can go ahead with the quorum.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer. First order of business is public comments. Do we have any public comments?
Good morning. Yes, we do have one public comment that was received by email. If I could please read that into the record for you.
Please do.
Okay, this comes from Mr. Neil Cosentino, and it reads as follows. We thank you all for all that you do for Tampa Bay mobility. We invite a staff and others to join in developing the Community Circulators Consortium, a public-private partnership program. And we recommend that you visit www.jitneyac.com. FEI Camelot, Florida includes FASTA USA/Florida is an all-volunteer, public interest, self-funded, all-Florida think tank. Our VMG vision goal is Florida first in quality of life and standard of living. We promote community-based transportation systems, AKA community micro-transit circulators or jitneys, regarding Seminole Heights, West Tampa, Sulphur Springs, East Tampa, Progress Village, Davis Islands, Waimama Ruskin, University City. We seek a VMG vision mission goal for Heartline to promote and fund community-based programs. Each requesting community will be allocated up to $2 million as a set aside to fund their beta community-based circulator/jitney system. The funds remain with Heart in an escrow-like account, and the jitney community makes draws from their accounts to fund their mobility system, leasing and buying services as needed from Heart, such as consultant services, HR, healthcare, leased circulator jitney buses and other vehicles, insurance licensing, accounting, fuel, maintenance, legal services, driver training, government requirements, and other. Community-based circulator system will have total curb rights and self-determine their manager's salary, driver salaries, service hours, 24/365, routes and destinations, advertising, local, city, county, state, national, special mobility service, mobility mode mix, and other. Signed, FMI Cornelius Neil Cosentino, USAF retired, Camelot, Florida, neil.cosentino@icloud.com.
Okay, thank you, Cindy. Any other comments?
We have nobody else on the line with public comments at this time.
Okay, thank you for that. Public comments is therefore closed. We'll move on to the next item, which is the consent agenda item. Approval of the prior minutes. Are there any corrections, additions? Otherwise, I'll take a motion to approve.
Move to approve the consent. Second.
Been a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Please call the roll.
Jim Holton,
Yes.
Cliff Manuel,
Yes.
Commissioner Long,
Yes.
Rich McLean,
Yes.
Commissioner Kemp,
Yes.
Commissioner Starkey,
Yes.
and Commissioner Seal.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Motion passes 7-0.
Great, fantastic. We now turn to item 5, and first up is the Legislative Subcommittee report. Cliff Manuel, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We had a couple of items today to report to the board on. First item of interest was a legislative update from our federal legislative group, Van Scoyoc. Both Harry and Steve provided input. If you could recognize them for input to the board, I would appreciate it.
Absolutely. The team at Van Scoyoc is recognized. Who wants to speak first? Harry or?
Mr. Chairman, this is Steve Palmer. Let me just quickly summarize what we presented to the Legislative Subcommittee for the board today, and thank you for the opportunity. The Congress is in their traditional August recess right now. They are, despite the fact that the last COVID legislation was left without final passage, they have gone home to campaign and take a break. They are coming back. The House of Representatives has been called back though, and tomorrow we'll vote on a bill just solely dealing with the U.S. Postal Service, essentially a $25 billion bailout bill that would also prohibit some of the changes that have been discussed prior to the election this year. That could open the door for additional legislation that could bring more money in for transit as well as other healthcare issues, but that probably would not happen until sometime after Labor Day. So we're looking at another delay in terms of any kind of final outcome of the next COVID relief bill. The other pieces of legislation that we're looking at this fall after Labor Day are, with a fiscal year starting on October 1st, there is almost near certainty that the Congress will have to pass a continuing resolution to keep the government operating beyond September 30th, which is the end of this fiscal year. And then the FAST Act, the Surface Transportation Reauthorization Bill, expires this year. It's a 5-year bill. It expires on September 30th. Despite the fact that the House has passed its bill, a $500 billion surface transportation bill as a part of a very large $1.5 trillion infrastructure bill, the Senate was not able to act on that bill this year, just simply because it's an election year and they need to raise revenue to be able to pay for those bills, and they haven't had the desire to address that prior to the election. So we're looking at a continuing, an extension of that bill, probably for a year at current funding levels again. So for TBARTA, the impact should be minimal. There won't be any growth in revenues, but it should be a continuation of the formula programs that TBARTA receives. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have or others.
Steve, one question I have: would you anticipate in preliminary discussions with anyone on the Hill that there would be another phase 2 kind of CARES Act for government bodies like TBARTA in the subsequent fiscal year?
So the House has passed the HEROES Act, and it's a very large $3 trillion bill that had not only had additional money for public transit, it was about $15.75 billion for transit. There was also money for state and local governments, a significant amount of money. The Senate and the White House chose to focus on a $1 trillion funding level. The House and the Senate couldn't come to terms on that, and they've set it aside. They haven't said no bill. They just left for their August recess without any kind of closure on that. I think there's a very large expectation that something will happen, but it's not clear, Mr. Chairman, that it will happen at what level or when.
Okay. Thank you. Members, other questions for Steve? Okay, none being heard. Cliff, I'll turn it back over to you.
Chair Holton, we also got an update from RSA. Ron Pierce was in attendance at the legislative committee meeting. I think he since had prior engagement and had to leave. So if we could recognize Natalie King for that update, I'd appreciate it.
Natalie, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to summarize what Ron was able to share earlier today, there is obviously not a ton of activity going on. We are in the down season, but we wanted to give you an update on kind of where we are from a fiscal standpoint. The Revenue Estimating Conference has been meeting and getting new numbers as to where the sales tax and the trust fund dollars are at. With that, we are seeing that we will have about a $5.4 billion revenue reduction over the next 2 years. About $3 billion of that is actually in the current fiscal year. With that said, however, as we know that the legislature had attempted before concluding session to put additional reserves back on top of what they already had. We have a current reservation or $4 billion reserve. And with the CARES funding that has come down with an additional $4 to $5 billion that would be able to be backfilled, we believe that the legislature believes that they're in good posture, at least for now. But we'll be watching the estimating revenues and what's going to come into the coffers over the next 12 months to see where they're at there. The only other big piece of that is this, obviously, as the legislature goes and as the budget goes for the state, the priority that we have had for TBARTA for our appropriation may be impacted as we have discussions around securing the recurring dollars. As a strategy to approach that, we are moving forward with a letter from David Green to the Department of Transportation to engage in a discussion around strategy. And subsequently, we will then pursue conversations with key leadership in the governor's office, Senator Simpson, the incoming Senate president, as well as Chris Sprouse, the incoming House Speaker. So with that, I will stop and answer any questions.
Members, questions for Natalie? Okay, thank you, Natalie, for that presentation. Good luck with all those negotiations as we move forward. Cliff, I'll turn it back over to you.
The next item is an action item requested by the board to consider. The legislative committee reviewed with David the RSA contract requirements that allows us to extend their contract by 1 year. The committee voted on that issue and is recommending to the board that we consider that today for approval. I would like you to recognize David if he had anything to add to that item.
David, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't have anything to add at this point. This was an unusual item whereby it actually related to 2 different committees, the legislative subcommittee, but also the finance committee due to it being a contract. So I believe we've got a recommendation for approval under the finance committee report.
Okay, so no action is recommended at this time then, Cliff, coming out of the legislative committee?
No, we acted on it also and also recommended from the legislative committee that we recommend to the board approval. It did go through the finance committee as well this morning, and I have no problem with it being considered under Commissioner Long's agenda.
Alan, any reason to take that up now or subsequently?
Not legally. You can wait till the finance committee report if you want. Here's the
Okay.
recommendation.
All right, that'll be fine. Cliff, anything further to report from the legislative subcommittee?
The last item, just for the board's information, the legislative committee did agree to send a letter to FDOT outlining our position on the benefits of having them consider reoccurring funding for TBARTA. That action was taken and a letter is being sent just as advisory to the board. And that's my last item.
Okay, and that was recommended for the full board to approve that letter be sent? Or was that just came out of the legislative committee? I don't think the board needs full approval for that, correct?
Correct. The board did that at this point.
I'm
Just
just providing the advisory. I think we were advised that we did not need the full board's vote on that. And I don't think it's an agenda item for them to consider today. I just wanted to let them know that we had voted to send the letter and it will be sent under David's signature.
Yeah, members, before we send that letter off, I assume that's been included. Or you've seen this. David, has everyone included that in their packet or have seen that letter or not?
Yes, I believe that is in the full board packet today.
Members, if there are no other questions about that letter to go on to FDOT, we'll just have it sent out. Okay, Cliff, anything else?
That concludes our committee report. Chairman Holton, thank you.
Okay, thank you for that report. Next up is the Finance Committee report, and Commissioner Long, you're recognized. I can't hear Janet.
Commissioner Long is muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. The first issue on the Finance Committee report was the financials from 2020. And Melanie, if you or David, whichever one of you wants to, I can't see Melanie. I don't know where she is. Are you there?
I'm right here. Yes,
All
I
right,
am,
great.
Commissioner.
Do you want to review the 20 financials, please?
Absolutely. So the year to date through the month of July, the net surplus was 196,000. Now this 196,000 was 39,000 under the budgeted amount of 235,000. Now looking at the revenues here, we were under budget approximately $3.1 million, and this was primarily due to the PD&E and technology study, the timing. Looking at the expense categories, we were at $3 million under budget, and we were pretty much under budget all the categories here under expenses. Now looking at the balance sheet, accounts receivable balance at the end of July was $571,000, and our AP balance was $323,000. So our AR was greater than the AP, which is always a good thing. And at the end of July, our bank balance or our cash total was approximately $188,000 in the bank at the end of July. So that wraps up my July summary, financial summary. Any questions?
Any questions from the rest of the group? I can't see you, so you might want to just speak up if you have a question. Anyone? No? Okay, then let's move on to the second item, which was the State Government Relations and Lobbying Services. Our Finance Committee had quite a robust conversation with regard to this particular item, and we did approve moving it to the full board. That said, there was discussion with regard to the disappointment with the actions that our Hillsborough partner has taken. And I don't know if we want to summarize that here, but we are very concerned about Hillsborough County's participation in this regional effort that we have worked for so long to put in place. And we are hopeful that between David and Ron Pierce, that there can be further discussions with them, because if Hillsborough County pulls out of this partnership, the whole effort kind of goes, shattered. So I don't know if the rest of the board wants to speak to that a bit, but it is very disconcerting when we have 5 counties and now we have one who doesn't want to participate as a full partner. So Kathryn, did you have additional comments you wanted to make since you spoke to the issue as well?
Well, I've never seen this happen on any regional board that I serve on, where the contribution is restricted from being used for certain purposes. And maybe we could hear why this action was taken. We haven't seen the tape of the meeting, but I think it's alarming to all of us as we all work towards a regional solution that we had this occur. So needless to say, it's dismaying and concerning.
So Commissioner Kemp, I believe you're here today. Would you like to speak to it since you are the representative from Hillsborough?
Sure, I will. We voted, and I should say it was a 7-0 vote, unanimous vote on our county commission to bar our funding from being used to pay lobbying. And I think it's inappropriate for us to use our government dollars to pay for a lobbyist at TBARTA, particularly when the lobbyist 2 years in a row succeeded in taking $1 million from the HART budget, 2 years in a row, $1 million each year, also the PSTA budget. So I do not think we should be supporting that. That's exactly what I said at the county commission meeting, that we should bar government dollars from being used to pay a lobbyist. And it's particularly when the lobbyist has lobbied against our interests in Hillsborough County.
Commissioner Kemp, we were wondering if Hillsborough County has lobbyists, on hired lobbyists at the county.
Maybe you should, I'm just telling you exactly what, why I made that motion and that we had the support. So I'm not going to further engage on this, but I think it was the right, appropriate thing to do. And as I said, we did get a unanimous vote.
Let me interject here, Commissioner Kippen. Thank you for those clarifying remarks. There was a discussion, I don't think you were present at the committee meeting, but there was a discussion of potentially all of the member counties getting around the table and negotiating potential member dues and so forth. And so we all have a general consensus here, because TBARTA can't work as a house divided. It has to be together, find some common ground. And I was hoping as a member of this board, you might be able to help facilitate meetings with your fellow commissioners and executive staff at Hillsborough County to discuss consensus and common ground, so there's not this ongoing perception of competitiveness with the different counties or with TBARTA as an entity. So if, I don't want to put you on the spot if you don't want to elaborate more, but I'm hopeful that we can have a constructive dialogue to get back on track here, especially given all the fiscal issues that the counties face.
Well, I'll just say this too. I think the board, I don't know if y'all are aware, but I watched the Manatee County Commission, who is also very interested in withdrawal from TBARTA. And so, I mean, there should be some awareness of that. But I think for the TBARTA board to have supported taking money from local transit agencies rather than creating the pie and expanding it, which was apparently the original intent. But I also, feel like TBARTA has moved ahead with, with plans that have, you've heard serious concerns from Hillsborough County with regards to those plans. And those plans haven't, I have not seen the evidence of bringing in more money, of doing a project that Hillsborough County can be supportive of. I'll just say that.
Dialogue. Chair, Kathryn, I see you.
Yes, I'm just curious because Commissioner Kemp just stated that Hillsborough County was wanting to withdraw from TBARTA.
Can I clarify that I did not say that? That was not what I said. I said you should watch, you might be aware of the Manatee County and you understand that. So I did not say that.
So I would just like to clarify for the purposes of the rest of the board that there were no, I sit on the board of PSTA, and I can tell you that every legislative committee meeting that we have at PSTA, our lobbyist is there. And as well, we always take up an item that relates to TBARTA so that we are sure that we are working together on our legislative ask, because what's good for one is good for all. And there were no dollars taken in year 2 from either PSTA or HART in the legislative budget. So I'm not sure exactly where that information is coming from, Commissioner Kemp. I don't know if Secretary Gwynn, because again, I can't see everybody. Do you have any input on this issue, Mr. Secretary?
So, and I notice Ming's on the line, so he can correct me if I say anything that's not entirely correct. But as you know, when we get an earmark, it's not new money. It's not we have to find money within our existing budget to transfer to cover the earmark. And typically what the direction is that the money that's used to cover the earmark comes from the district in which the earmark is applied, and with the type of fund that is being used is transferred from a similar type of fund. The first thing that we do though is we work with our central office to look statewide to see if there's any public transportation funds that we can use to cover the earmark without having to go to something within the district. And this past year, I believe that's what we were able to do. We found statewide some money around the state that we could use. The previous year, we did have to cover it, but what we did was we worked with the local, with HART and PSTA to find money that they were not planning to use at that time for a variety of reasons. Either they didn't have the local match to make it work, or they had to delay the project. And so our intent was not to harm anything. There may have been a budget transfer, but the intent was not to harm any project where the money was actually going to be used. And I'll just ask Ming to either confirm or add to that if I've stated anything incorrectly. If he's there.
Secretary, you're absolutely correct, and that's what we did the last time when we had to take money out of the work program. We tried to avoid the most flexible funding program like the block.
I can't really hear him, Mr. Chair.
Ming, speak up. It's hard to hear.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Better.
Okay, I'm sorry, I was too far from the mic. So I just want to confirm the secretary was absolutely correct. So last time when we had to take money out of the work program, we tried to take money away from projects that were not ready to move forward. We avoided the most flexible funding because I know things like block grant, our transit agency rely on those funding for operations. So we were being very careful and diligent not to cause any, significant hardship, for the transit agency. So, and that's the process that we follow, try not to harm anyone.
Okay, thank you so much for that clarification, which obviously is not what was communicated to the rest of the members of the Hillsborough Commission. So I'm not sure exactly who David, perhaps you need to meet with the commissioners and clarify this with everyone, so there's no miscommunication. Or maybe a written memo, I'm not sure. But, yes?
Excuse me, to be clear, it's been just, yeah. To be clear, it's been discussed at this meeting 2 years in a row. I know this year no money went to TBARTA because they got $2.2 million from the CARES Act. But for 2 years in a row, the earmark discussion has been brought up at the TBARTA meeting. I was told for 2 years that we lost $1 million that was allocated or would have been allocated to our operations and maintenance facility. And that PSTA lost $1 million of what would have been allocated to them as well for 2 years standing, not this year, but the prior 2 years. It was already discussed at our TBARTA meeting, and it was brought to our attention that that our lobbyists shouldn't be going for earmarks. That they were to try to get general revenue support. Because the earmarks had to be taken out of District 7 transit funds. I understand that the district secretary tried to do it with as little harm as possible, but I don't think that this changes the facts of how this was done in the past. And so I don't want to be characterized as misrepresenting what the true occurrences were, as it was reported to us at the HART board meeting and at TBARTA multiple times over the years. So I'll just
your comments are noted, Commissioner Kemp.
Yeah, let's call for a vote on the government relations, and I'd like a little clarity on that. So maybe David, if you and Alan can write a memo discussing these issues, or whether funds were directed one way in the exclusion of another for the benefit of the board. So I don't think we would debate ad infinitum the topic now, so.
That's very wise. So let's go ahead. Are you going to go ahead and call for the
Yeah,
vote?
yeah. Janet, are you ready for a vote on the
Yes.
on the lobbying services?
Yes.
Okay, I'll accept a motion for that.
Move approval.
Second.
Is there any further discussion? Jennifer, please call the roll.
Excuse me, can you restate the motion, please?
Yes.
The motion is to approve the contract with our government relations and lobbying services in Tallahassee.
And this is a piggyback contract with
On
PS.
PSTA, correct. It's the final year of the contract.
Okay. But this won't involve Hillsborough County funds.
I don't believe that's correct.
That's correct, Commissioner Count. Yes.
Right.
Chair Holton, we need to ask for public comment.
Yes. Is there public comment on this, Cindy?
Have no one on the line for public comment.
Okay, none being heard. Any further discussions or questions? Please call the roll then.
Jim Holton,
Yes.
Cliff Manuel,
Yes.
Commissioner Long,
Yes.
Rich McLean,
Yes.
Commissioner Kemp,
Yes.
Commissioner Starkey,
Yes.
Commissioner Seal,
Yes.
and it looks as though Commissioner Mitten has rejoined us. Commissioner Mitten, how would you like to vote on this?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Motion passes 8-0.
Thank you. Janet, I'll recognize you back again for a presentation on the budget.
Right. So Melanie, would you please summarize the fiscal year 2021 budget, please?
Yes, thank you, Commissioner. So included in your packet is the final draft for the FY 2021 budget. So last month, we actually brought initial draft budget to the Finance Committee for them to review and kind of look at the budget. Since then, we had many discussions, David, Debbie, and myself, along with Commissioner Long, some discussions on how we can revisit the budget and revising the budget to see exactly what our operations needs were. We were able to identify some of these areas by reducing some of the operating expenses. And from that, what you have today, it reflects the final draft budget. From the initial draft budget was $7.4 million, and the budget that you see today is 6.6. So from within the last couple of weeks, we were able to reduce the budget of approximately $800,000, and which is 11% decrease from last month. So looking at the comparison for FY20 budget to this year upcoming budget, we're looking at $900,000 less in operating expenses, which is a 12% decrease. Our revenues are approximately from all the funding source are $7.1 million with, like I said, the operation of $6.9 million, leaving the capital expenditures $546,000. So at the end of with a net reserve of $190,000, leaving a 10-day reserve balance. So today our intent is to ask for final approval of the FY 2021 budget that you have today in your packet.
Janet, any other comments before I call for a vote, or
no?
Members, any questions? None being heard, I'll accept a motion to approve the budget.
Move approval of the budget for 2021.
Second, Commissioner Starkey.
Second.
A motion and a second. Any further discussion? Public comment? Is there any public comment on the budget?
We do not have any public comment at this time.
Thank you. None being heard. Jennifer, please call the roll.
Jim Holton,
Yes?
Cliff Manuel,
Yes.
Commissioner Long,
Yes.
Rich McLean,
Yes.
Commissioner Kemp,
Yes.
Commissioner Starkey,
Yes.
Commissioner Seal,
Yes.
and Commissioner Mitten.
Yes.
Okay, motion passes 8-0.
Okay, thank you. And Janet, any further comments
That's the end of my report, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you for that report. Next up is the Policy Committee report, and Rich McLean is recognized.
Thank you, Chair. We had one item in the Policy Committee meeting today, and that was the Resolution 2020-08, support for Manatee County Area Transit Route 99 grant application. For those, for better understanding, Route 99 is on Highway 41, and it takes passengers from Bradenton down to Sarasota. What they're looking for is just our basic support as they go forward with the grant application. Chair, if you could recognize Chris Dionitis, that would be great.
Chris, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair. As Rich mentioned, this item is a resolution of support for Manatee County Area Transit and their service development grant to make frequency improvements to the Route 99. The Route 99 serves from downtown Bradenton to downtown Sarasota along US 41 and serves the airport, colleges, and commercial and retail along 41. The grant was submitted to FDOT. This grant will fund operating costs in the amount of $1,575,000 for frequency improvements from going from 30-minute service to 20-minute service during the peak. This service need is the top service priority for MCAT's adopted TDP. The Route 99 expansion is one of the top priorities for TBARTA's recently adopted Envision 2030. The service is one of the highest ranked project proposals in Sarasota Manatee MPO's draft 2045 LRTP. The capital needs for this service expansion is currently funded in the FDOT work program. And the staff recommends the board approve this resolution.
Okay, members, any questions about the resolution? Okay, Rich, any further comments before yes, Commissioner Kemp.
I just like to move approval and emphasize that this is exactly, I think, the kinds of functions that TBARTA should serve. And this sounds like just exactly the kind of service, and the amount is, I know it's a different DOT district, but the 1.5 million, that's pretty robust. And to do 20-minute service on an appropriate street grade level route like this, I was glad to hear about this, and I think it'll be a great service improvement.
Thank you for those comments. We'll accept that as a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
The motion and a second. Any further discussion? Any public comment? Jennifer, please call the roll.
Jim Holton,
Yes.
Cliff Manuel,
Yes.
Commissioner Long,
Yes.
Rich McLean,
Yes.
Commissioner Kemp,
Yes.
Commissioner Starkey,
Yes.
Commissioner Seal,
Yes.
Commissioner Mitten.
Yes.
Okay, motion passes 8-0.
Thank you for that. Rich, I'll turn it back over to you. Any further comments from the Policy Committee?
Nothing else. I do want to thank Commissioner Kemp for her comments. They were spot on in what I was going to discuss also. I do believe this shows a good way forward with Manatee and how they're pursuing. And then the fact that they were looking for support was great. So glad we can do this, and that's a good movement forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. Next up is the Citizens Advisory Committee report, and Bill Roberts is recognized.
Thank you, and good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the TBARTA board. I'm Bill Roberts. I chair the Your Citizens Advisory Committee. We met on August 19th, just 2 days ago, and I have a brief report. The CAC took no action, had no action items come before us. As part of our discussion, we did discuss and confirm our support for the motion that you just approved, which is the Manatee County MCAT Route 99 project. We think this also is consistent with TBARTA's mission, and we're looking forward to the implementation of that project. At our meeting on the 19th, we saw a presentation about the communications efforts of TBARTA. Very informative and very helpful for our membership. We had a brief discussion about legislative efforts, which this board has discussed this morning. Our CAC members generally offered their services again to be helpful in their local communities. Many of them have been appointed by you board members, and so feel free to reach out to them and or coordinate any efforts you may have with your CAC representatives. As you have on your agenda a subject titled for future meeting subjects, we've introduced a new section in our CAC meeting called Members' Interests. I'll touch on a couple of those that seem to be things that the CAC would like to look at. One is we requested a future presentation on the status of the Cross Bay Ferry Service, which we believe is certainly a regional project. We also had a discussion and expressed interest on following up with a recent HART action in which they authorized a feasibility study for the CSX railroad tracks that run through our region. HART has taken some action, has authorized some funds, and it's my understanding they'll be issuing an RFP for that feasibility study. And the CAC wants, of course, to monitor that. We'll be happy to report any information we get to your committee. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'll take any questions and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Bill. Members, questions for Bill? None being heard. Thank you again for that good report.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, the next up is the Transit Management Committee report. There was no meeting, so no briefing on that. The chairman's report, I'll be brief. The main issue I would like to touch upon is a consensus again, and I think we've had a good dialogue today, and we have seen representations of where different members are in terms of the function and purpose of TBARTA. It is my hope going forward that we can arrive at a real locus of consensus here and focus on projects and things that we can actually get done and funded and not be divisive and competitive on with the other transit agencies. I think that's what the legislature had in mind when they created TBARTA, and I think that that was the spirit of which we all embarked on this adventure. But let's try to come together again now and have a common vision where we segregate issues that are local from issues that are regionally important and try to move forward. And I thank the members today for their time and trying to increase the and hopefully we can keep that up forward next year and face some very significant fiscal constraints because of COVID and other national and international issues. So that's all I have. I'll recognize David now for the Executive Director's report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, everybody. First off, I'm happy to announce that we officially submitted our CARES Act grant application on August 3rd. I know that might not seem like a big deal, but it's the first federal grant application that TBARTA developed and submitted itself. And as you know from our budget discussion, it's a critical part of us continuing to operate next year. So it's a pretty significant milestone for the agency. FTA notified us last week that the application is currently in final review, so we look forward to it being approved within the next couple of weeks. Second is a follow-up on Lilium. At the last board meeting, you all asked staff to contact Lilium, discuss next steps for bringing air taxis to Tampa Bay. I had 3 phone calls with them since then and another with TPA. We still need further discussion, but things have been positive, and I look forward to having a more detailed report for you next month. Next, I know I announced last month that we filled our procurement and grants manager position, and I'm happy to announce that Diane Durr joined the team on Monday, and I'm excited to introduce her this morning. Diane comes to us with experience in city and county government and has a background in procurement, compliance, and grants. So please join me in welcoming Diane Durr. Diane, would you like to say a few words?
Good morning.
Good
morning.
Okay, thank you. To Board Chairman Holton and to the board members, it gives me great pleasure to be able to say to you good morning and to say that I am so excited to be a part of the TBARTA team. I am grateful to David for selecting me to come on board and to actually put some of my experience in compliance and grants to work for TBARTA. So I am happy to be here, and I am just delighted to have this opportunity. So thank you all so much, and I look forward to working with you all to some degree. Thank you so much.
Thank you for those comments and welcome aboard. And we certainly need your expertise in getting some money on state, federal levels. So we look forward to working with you on that.
Thank you.
And lastly, we thought July could be our final electronic meeting, but will remain virtual at least through September. Governor DeSantis issued Executive Order 20-193, extending that ability until October 1st. So we will see you on Zoom again next month, and obviously let you know of any updates we hear for meetings beyond that. Future meeting topics remain intermodal centers and express service from downtown St. Pete to the airport. And we are also coordinating a presentation next month on Hyperloop. Want to extend birthday wishes this month to Commissioner Bellamy and Mayor Kreisman, who must have had some heck of a milestone birthday because he actually got a brand new pier out of the deal. That doesn't just happen every year. So big congratulations to him and Commissioner Bellamy, and hope they have good, safe birthdays. Unless there are any questions, that concludes my report.
Thank you, David. Members, questions for David? Okay, none being heard. Our next up is a presentation on the cable car, and Stephen Dale, you're recognized.
Thanks very kindly. All right, so first off, thank you very kindly for having me here. Happy to have this conversation. If anyone has any questions, comments, or concerns as I'm going through this material, feel free to cut me off and ask a question, and I'll be happy to answer it. If we can get moving. Next slide, please, Chris. As Chairman said, my name is Stephen Dale, and I'm with SCJ Alliance, which is a planning, architecture, and engineering firm out of the Seattle region in the Pacific Northwest. We are about 120 staff, and we have a specialty as well in cable-propelled transit and cable car systems. We've done work throughout the world in the United States, including work on systems such as the Roosevelt Island Tram, the Los Angeles Dodgers new gondola system, and the Portland Aerial Tram. Next slide. We are also working with the Oakland Athletics right now on their proposed new system connecting the BART train down to their new stadium at Jack London Square. Next slide. We've also done work in San Francisco, a variety of ski resort settings around the country as well. We really do pride ourselves on the fact that we've realized projects rather than just studied projects. We take projects all the way from the very beginning of the process, all the way through to the very end of the process. We're also the only fully independent cable car consultancy on earth that can bring a project all the way from beginning to end. So while we work with both the major manufacturers, we have no fiscal arrangement with them. In terms of sales commissions or anything like that, which sometimes does occur in our industry. Next slide. And just a sample here, a variety of our clients from around the world. Next slide. As some of you may or may not know, right now, cable car systems are one of the fastest growing transit technologies on earth right now. Two of the major places in the world where this is being deployed is in La Paz, Bolivia, which we'll speak about further. Medellin, Colombia was the first city in the world to fully integrate a gondola system into their transit network, and that was in 2004. And they've since built roughly 10 systems since then. Obviously, we know New York City, Mexico City just completed their first system, and they're working on 2 more right now. And we're actually working with people in Mexico City right now on a 4th system. Grenoble, France, and several other systems throughout the United States. Next slide. Right now, these are 3 systems that are projects that we're engaged in right now. Burnaby, British Columbia, connecting their SkyTrain to the university at the top of a hill. In Los Angeles, California, we're working on 2 separate projects, one of which is with the Dodgers, connecting Union Station up to Dodger Stadium. And we're also working with Dover in the UK to connect the historic Dover Castle to the downtown. A few other projects, you guys obviously know about the new system in Disney World. This is sort of a blessing and a curse. It's great because it's a multi-section, multi-station system, but of course, because it's in a resort environment, it almost reinforces this perspective that it is only for resort applications, which is categorically not true. We're also working in Idaho Springs, Colorado, and we were the prime consultants on the system in Juneau, Alaska, which you can see there. For those of you who haven't had a chance to review the WSP study that was recently completed, this is a very high level understanding of the technology. It's a robust technology that can move 3,000 to 6,000 people per hour in each direction. It's a developed industry. This is something a lot of people miss, is that this is not actually a new technology. It's a very old technology. The 2 major suppliers in the world date from the late 1800s. So they predate basically every other form of mass transit technology that we use in our cities at this time. It's an affordable technology that's cost effective compared to other fixed link transit. It's also clean. The vehicles are electrically powered. There's low energy consumption per person, and there's 0 point source carbon emissions. Research from many jurisdictions around the world shows that it's the safest form of transit technology, at least of public transit systems, and that's largely because it is separated from mixed transit. The vehicles are also 100% accessible to all users, including strollers, bikes, wheelchairs, and support animals. Very simple overview of how the technology works. It's a series of small cabins that circulate. They're propelled and supported by ropes. They detach within the stations. Stations are staffed with attendants to allow people to get on and off. And the most important thing really to remember is that cornering must occur at stations. So the art and science of planning a cable car is really figuring out where those stations are going to be, because stations represent the largest cost associated with a cable car. Next slide. I don't want to rehash the existing study that was already done by WSP, but I did want to highlight some things and sort of mention other things that should be considered when you're looking at this technology that were maybe not mentioned in the study or were skimmed over. One of the major benefits of the technology is the fact that it has very predictable short wait times. We can get the wait times between vehicles down to 11 seconds. And anyone who knows anything about transit planning knows that the single biggest impediment to getting people to switch from their cars to public transit are short, reliable wait times. And we can deliver that in spades. The technology is very quick to install. Due to the fact that most of the equipment is manufactured off-site, we can actually have a system built in 1 to 2 years. For the London Olympics, for example, from the very idea of the project to opening only took 9 months. The system is very, very quiet. The noise generated in urban environments is essentially inaudible compared to the street level traffic. We can also, in current times of COVID, we can be socially distant. We have very small cabins, although they can also go as large as a city bus. But we can sanitize them between uses. That's already occurring right now. And because of the fact that we have very short wait times for the technology, it means that we have less people queuing in stations, which means less crowded platforms, which means less issues with social distancing and people crowding together. It's also a very, very resilient technology that's impacted little by natural disasters like hurricanes and floods, which is something that in Florida we do have to be aware of. It's a little known story, but in Hurricane Sandy up in New York, the Roosevelt Island tram was the first piece of fixed link transit to be operational after the storm blew out. So while the subways were still struggling to get back in operation, the tram was operational within 42 hours after the storm blew out. There's also something called the hybrid economic model, which we'll discuss further, but it basically means that the locals are subsidized by tourists, and we'll get into that a bit further. And perhaps the most important thing that I really do want to highlight when it comes to the WSP study is that the study claims that gondolas are only capable of system lengths of 3 miles, and that is incorrect. There is no maximum length in terms of how long the system can go. For example, next slide, please. This is the map of the Mi Teleférico system in Bolivia, La Paz. This has 39 stations and over 20 miles of cable cars. And as we know, 20 miles is greater than 3 miles. And it was all built in a span of 6 years and more being added every year. A couple of years ago, this system actually set a record where it moved 500,000 passengers in a single day. Next slide. And if we look as the crow flies, this system, which is called the Mi Teleférico, covers roughly 12 miles from its two extremities. So what does that look like in a Tampa Bay context? Next slide. So if we take 12 miles and divide by 2 to get a radius of 6 miles, assuming the center of it is the center of those 12 miles, this is what a 6-mile radius looks like approximately from the Tampa Bay Convention Center at the center. Or next slide, PIE. Next slide, St. Pete Pier. Next slide, or Manatee County Courthouse. And if we go, next slide as well, if we go straight and take the 12 miles that we got from the benchmark from La Paz and just as the crow flies as well, what does that get us here? We could literally go from a place like Clearwater Beach all the way to Gateway, Carolina. And lastly, the Phu Quoc cable car in Vietnam. This is a system that travels 5 miles. It was built 2 years ago. It has only 2 stations. It's the longest single section cable car for the purpose of moving people on Earth. If desired, there would be no technical reason one couldn't extend the system further simply by adding more stations or more sections. So the 3-mile upper limit stated in the study is incorrect, and it's really important to understand that. It doesn't mean that all situations are appropriate for a cable car, but we have to analyze the given situation and the given context to figure out if a cable car is appropriate or not. Next slide, please. I mentioned the hybrid economic model, and the basic key with the hybrid economic model is the idea that because of the novelty and the views that the technology provides, tourists are willing to pay a premium price over the locals. So you have to set up a system that finds a way to basically get the tourists to pay the premium while subsidizing the locals. And this is common throughout the world. This is a very, very common setup in our industry. And because of the fact that the CapEx and the operations costs are lower, and there are ancillary revenue streams, and because the local commuter fares are subsidized by the tourists, you can do this very, very cost effectively. And the key thing to understand, next slide, is what we call the cable car spectrum of ridership. All cable cars are going to land somewhere between, they're never going to be 100% recreational users, they're never going to be 100% transit users. Each system is going to fall somewhere on the spectrum. So for example, in London, ridership is roughly 95% recreational and 5% transit. But interestingly, that system is still owned by the London Transit Authority. Whereas in a place like Portland, the split is roughly 80% transit, 20% recreational. But what's really interesting about the Portland case is that while only 20% of their riders are recreational riders, the money that is spent by those 20% covers 50% of the annual operations and maintenance costs of the system. Next slide, please. So how do we get here? I'm sure a lot of you know our colleagues at Echelon, Darryl Leclerc, Steve Kirkin. A while back, we were commissioned by Echelon to do an initial conceptual analysis, and it was done in partnership with Doppelmayr, which is the world's largest manufacturer of cable cars. We analyzed 6 cable transit lines in various configurations, and it was a very general, high-level exploration of connections around Tampa and St. Pete. And generally, things came back fairly favorable, and we estimated that the cost, compared to some of the plans that were being discussed at the time, would be roughly 1/3 to 2/3 the cost of a comparable light rail system. Next slide. During our consultations with stakeholders afterwards, though, we were really, it was Clearwater Beach that was highlighted to us as something that really a lot of people were interested in most, largely due to the bottleneck that occurs on the causeway, which I think we all know. And I really love this photo, if we can jump to the next slide. Because of course there's that big sign that says yield to buses, and we can see the Jolly Trolley and another bus above it stuck right in the traffic. So it is a bottleneck that does cause considerable issues. The Jolly Trolley, next slide. As we know, it's not a great level of service. It's susceptible to traffic jams, as we've seen, and it has 30-minute headroom. It's not really a great form of public transit, at least for the purposes of connecting the beach. Alternatively, if you were to drive, we know that there's not enough parking to meet the demand that's there, and vehicles need to constantly circle to find parking. There's also the issue that essentially that land is some of the most valuable real estate in Clearwater, and it's given over to parking. If we were to find a way to remove some of that parking, the redevelopment opportunities and the tax base that would be generated would be significant. At the same time, at Coachman Park, we have a massive volume of underutilized parking spaces, which has proximity to downtown Clearwater and access to many different downtown attractions. So we started playing around with this idea. Next slide, please. Was basically connecting the beach to landside with an intermediary stop at the aquarium, basically piggybacking on the causeway. Relocate some percentage of parking from the beach to landside and open up all that redevelopment opportunity on the beach. And you'd see something that might look like this. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. We also see that there would be a reverse flow. It's easy to think about it as it's about getting people from landside to the beach, but the reverse would also apply as well, where people who stay at the beach, maybe they want to be in downtown to go to the restaurants or the theater, of course, in a post-COVID world. But of course, sometimes that can be difficult, especially when it comes to if you want to go for dinner, you want to have a couple glasses of wine with dinner, that becomes more challenging. And again, if you're on vacation, you want to be able to do those things. So we do see an opportunity here for reverse flow traffic as well from the beach to landside. Next, generalized stats, it would be roughly 2 miles, 15 to 20 miles per hour, frequency of 30 to 60 seconds between vehicles, and a capacity of around 2,500 ppHPD. And we estimate right now that the cost, plus minus 30%, around 75 million. And that really depends upon the technology choice you make. We do see, because of the volume of people that go to Clearwater Beach, we do see it as financeable by the private sector. And we see the benefit to the city by opening up development opportunities at the beach. And obviously it reduces emissions by preventing idling and circling, and makes Clearwater Beach more attractive both to locals and to tourists alike. The challenge we ran into when talking about this idea was that there was no known formal approvals pathway, such as an unsolicited bid mechanism, that it would allow a private sector entity to develop this project. And public sector agencies have been reticent on the technology, though I do think that's changing, particularly given the results of the WSP study. So in terms of how to advance the existing work, we're not saying Clearwater is what you should do. We're saying that within the WSP study, there's a whole list of potential pilot projects that they highlight within that study. So we would suggest identifying 3 potential pilot projects. Maybe one of them is Clearwater, maybe not, though I do think Clearwater has a very high chance of success from a financing perspective. But winnow down that list to 3 potential pilot projects, conduct a preliminary economic and technical assessment of each with the goal of identifying 1 or 2 quick wins, and then conduct the necessary detailed studies on that system, and would include clarity on approvals pathway and procurement method, which also would tie into ownership model. Are you looking for it to be owned by the public sector? Or are you looking for it to be owned by the private sector, and how would that work? Lastly, we also feel that there are a few policy recommendations that we would certainly encourage TBARTA to consider. The first one would be that at least from a very high level, in an early stage of looking at a transit project, we would suggest including cable cars within the modal assessment. That's a pretty easy ask, but it also means that you're covering your bases and you're looking at that technology early in the process to see whether it's appropriate or not. Sometimes the analysis can be as simple as 2 pages in an hour, and it's clear that it's not a good fit. But in situations where there is a clear fit, it's important that it's part of the modal assessment at the beginning. We also feel that there's an opportunity here to create an unsolicited bid mechanism, very similar to LA County Metro. We've been dealing with the LA County Metro unsolicited bid mechanism for a couple years now, and it's a very, very effective means to allow the private sector to participate in public transit products or services in a way that both balances the need for the public sector's transparency, but also the private sector's need for clarity of process. We would also suggest using the existing study's findings to tap into federal and state level funding sources that perhaps could help advance a pilot project. And that's really it. Questions, comments, and concerns?
Thank you for that presentation. And this fits very well into our focus on innovative technologies, as the board members know. There's, I believe, and David, I'll get some clarity from you on this. I believe there's additional monies left over from WS study that we could actually more refine, actual alignments, in furtherance of this now. If you can comment on that, maybe Stephen can as well, in terms of next steps, because this presents a very comparable opportunity to the Lilium cooperation that we embarked upon as well. So I'd like to open that up to discussion, especially with the legislature's desire for us to move towards innovative transportation solutions.
Yes, thanks, Chair. So I'll comment on the funding first. To I guess remind everybody about that particular grant we received. It was $1 million from the legislature specifically for innovative transit solution studies. That was the grant that we used to fund the initial study with WSP, which looked at the 3 different modes, aerial transit, Hyperloop, and air taxis. So we have roughly $750,000, $760,000 remaining in that grant for further research and study work related to any of those 3 modes or something else that might be innovative that falls under the scope of that particular grant. There obviously was significant conversation at our last board meeting related to air taxis and work that might be required in order to bring them to Tampa Bay. So of the remaining funds, we are happy to squeeze whatever amount of work into that money that we possibly can, but it would be a matter of the board prioritizing what it wanted us to focus on. But what I've heard so far clearly is that air taxis is the #1 priority.
One question I had too, and perhaps Commissioner Long and Commissioner Seal can comment on this. My recollection was that Forward Pinellas had began a study already on potential cable car alignments in Pinellas County, both in North and South County, specifically Clearwater Beach and St. Pete. What happened with that? I remember Whit Blanton was very excited about the idea of this about a year ago, and then I didn't hear too much further from it. And if there's a way for TBARTA to partner with Pinellas on that. Janet or Karen, do you have any comments on that? Karen, yeah.
We really haven't talked about it at Ford Pinellas for quite some time, and I believe it's because TBARTA took on the innovative technology study. And so I'm very excited about this. I always have been. I think it's just an excellent tourist attraction as well as a transit alternative. And I'd really like to pursue this.
Can it be a joint project with Forward Pinellas and TBARTA, utilizing some of the monies we have left over?
We could do that. I'll certainly be happy to talk with Whit Blanton, our executive director, about it.
Janet, any thoughts you have on that as well? I know you were.
No, I agree with Commissioner Seal, word for word, and I'm really excited about this. As David knows, I have been pushing him since he came on board to get this particular presentation before the rest of the board. And it's been as frustrating to me as all get out that it has taken this long to move it forward. So while I totally am excited about the opportunity between downtown Clearwater and Clearwater Beach, I know that in conversations I've had with Daryl LeClaire, there were several other routes linking Pinellas and Hillsborough, if you can believe that. Well, with regard to what the opportunities might be. So I think the opportunities are endless if we can just, keep on moving forward.
It's an ancillary project with the Howard Franklin Bridge because it could use the existing to put up cable cars, and they're easily movable as well. And I think and maybe Secretary Gwynn can speak to this as well. I think there's a huge evacuation potential component in this as well during a major catastrophe in the Tampa Bay area.
Mr. Chairman, Chris Jadek.
Yes.
So I just want to make you aware, Whit Blanton was in the audience and I promoted him to panelist. I don't want to put him on the spot and I don't know if he wanted to comment, but I have admitted him as panelist if he wants to be recognized.
I would love to have him publicly comment, yeah, if he's available. Whit, welcome.
Can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Well, thank you. This is an interesting presentation, and we've certainly had some discussions with Stephen, Dale, with Steve Kirkin and Daryl over the years. I would say Ford Pinellas is very interested in partnering on this. We were poised to look at ways to pull together different funds to conduct this study about a year ago. And then I had a meeting with David Green, and David indicated that the legislature had provided some money and they would take the lead on this first initial pass. So we've kind of taken a step back and just waited for this to come forward. But I think as soon as there's the will of the TBARTA board, we can have that conversation about what we might be able to look forward to in the Clearwater Beach area. I do think that we need to make sure we reach out carefully to the city of Clearwater, because they were also poised to put some money into this a couple of years back. And for various reasons, they withdrew their funding, and they're very particular about placement of poles and access points. And so we'll just need to also include them as an equal partner in this process too.
No, I completely concur with that. And I think that we obviously were somewhat dependent on the WSP coming up with their findings, which have been positive. So I think we're all postured to potentially take the next step with this. And there are potential future alignments linking Gateway area and I know West Shore as well. And so I think there are opportunities abound with a technology like this that can be repositioned fairly easily and move according to different dictates of demographics and so forth. So
Mr. Chair, I think it's also worthy of note that from the initial, and I don't know, it's been quite some time now because it's taken us so long. There was in order to build this system, there are no public dollars that are needed to get it built and up and running. And so I do think it's really important that we moved post haste to talk with the new administration within the city of Clearwater, because they're a bit more progressive and forward thinking perhaps now than they have been in the past. And I certainly don't want to speak for them, but I mean, this could be an incredibly exciting economic development opportunity for our entire region as we move forward to get out of this pandemic and the downturn in our economy. So please, everybody, keep those comments in mind as well.
Thank you, Commissioner. Pat, I'll recognize you in a second. I'll just add that while I had the same thought was basically, is my understanding too, that the technology allows for rapid cleaning of potential of the cable cars because of COVID, with ultraviolet light. So that is an added benefit that will bring folks back into transit vehicles and so forth, to do that in a very expeditious way that I don't think is totally available in terms of buses or rail transit, although it is to some extent. And Pat, I know you were wanting to address this too, so you're recognized.
Thank you. I just wanted to say I thought it was a really interesting presentation, and I just some questions basically on the systems that they have operating now. So as I understand, in the U.S., Portland and the Roosevelt Tram are both systems that you all built.
We've not built them. We were the client representative on the Roosevelt Island Tram, and we also performed a variety of functions on Portland, though I was not involved in that. I would have to speak with our engineers to be able to comment on that.
I see. So, but what you're saying though, you're a company, I'm just trying to understand.
Yes.
That you take it from design right through to building at this time? Like that's your typical, how you do this?
Well, what we would do is, so there are two major suppliers of the technology. So we are planning, engineering, and architecture consultants, just like anything else. So we, just as a company that would specialize, let's say in light rail or heavy rail systems, one of our specialties is in cable cars. So we work in a very similar situation where oftentimes we're the owner's representative. We'll write the tenders, we'll do the analysis, we'll bring it all together, and then we will work with the supplier. Ultimately, the supplier winds up, typically they wind up as a part of a larger consortium, a general contractor, an EPC contractor, who would go forward and actually do all of the installation in that.
So I've been on the Roosevelt tram and the Portland Portland cars. I also did Medellin, Colombia, with their noted gondola system some time ago, which was really interesting to ride. And I understood that they were widely ridiculed throughout South America and in other places for building their gondola. But when I went there, I can tell you that it was a huge service to people there. Of course, it went up the mountainside, saved a 2-hour trip. You could take it in 10 minutes. It was definitely longer than 3 miles. I took it the entire length to the national park. It had one stop on it that I made. I can't remember whether I had to get off and transfer when I took it all the way through. And one time
you would have had to at that point, because there was there's an additional fare at that station where you switch from it being part of a unified fare zone to a new fare zone to get to the national park.
Oh, okay. I do remember paying a mere $2 to ride it, which I thought was pretty amazing. And it was very well used and very quick. I have it's just very interesting to see this. So I knew Seattle was looking at a gondola system. So can you just refresh a little bit on the status there?
There's no active program of work in Seattle. We were engaged on a small program of work with one of the suburban municipalities in that region, but Seattle does not have any significant program of work going on in the cable car sector at this stage.
Okay. At one point you said 75 million, but I didn't know what 75 million referred to. Is that capital investment in a 3-mile project? What does 75 million stand for?
That was, and again, that is a very preliminary calculation that was operating under the assumption that we would be using what's called 3S technology. It would be a 2-mile long system with an intermediary stop. And again, that would be all in, but that also is dependent upon stations. One of the key things to understand about gondolas is that the vast majority of cost is in stations. So, and your stations can be, if you want to build the Taj Mahal and put a gondola in it, go for it. But it's going to cost appropriately that much. Whereas if you want a very, very simple basic gondola system where the vehicle comes down to grade and it's basically just surrounded by gates or a ticketing booth, you can do that. And that would be the most cost-effective way of doing it. That's part of the analysis that needs to occur, is figuring out what these stations need to do, where they're going to be, where the poles are going to be, and all of those things feed into the cost of the system, obviously.
So the 75 million, so that's between, and I understand all the variations you're saying. I'm just trying to get some kind of ballpark understanding here. So the 75 million, so then we're talking about 37 million a mile. And
if I can jump in there, per mile or distance-based calculations in our industry are worthless. We do not provide per distance-based calculations because, again, the vast majority of our costs are in stations. So the stations are what are crucial.
So if you had 2 miles without a station, it could be a lot less than 2 miles with a station.
Correct.
So the 75 million had one station. It was 2 miles long.
It had 3 stations.
Oh, 3 stations. Okay.
One at the beach, one at the aquarium, and one at.
Oh, that's right. Okay.
And again,
I'm sorry.
This
Thank
is
you
all
for
very, very general, high level, detailed analysis.
Right. And is that one of the things I was concerned about, I read about the Disney system, which recently built and stopped, had a kind of a bit of a disaster at the top of it. But one of the things on an ongoing basis that I wondered about was the fact that it didn't have air conditioning in the cars, which in Florida. Can you speak to that for a minute?
So it's super important, and I'm glad you asked this question. It's super important for everyone to understand that when we talk about a cable car, we're talking about a family of technologies. There's no single cable car technology. So when you talk about Portland and Roosevelt Island, for example, those are aerial trams. They are not gondolas.
Right.
Whereas
Okay.
in the Disney context, they're utilizing what's called a monocable gondola. Monocables can be equipped with air conditioning, though it's not a super elegant solution. I have no insight why Disney would have opted for no air conditioning except for cost. I don't know how, I don't know if the cabins are equipped with passive ventilation or anything. I was actually scheduled to go tour that system, and then the world changed quite dramatically about 8 months ago. So I don't have any clarity on that. What we would be talking about in the Clearwater context is we're operating under the assumption of what's called a 3S. A 3S system can be air conditioned. There would be onboard electronics. And it also would be equipped with, in the case of a stoppage, like you mentioned at Disney, there's something called a cabin recovery system where you're actually able to drag the cabins physically back into the nearest station in order to evacuate. And even beyond that, in the event that there's a catastrophic failure where there's even the cabin recovery system cannot be used, what happens is that the fire department and the rescue teams are trained prior to opening to know what the evacuation procedures are specific to that locality.
And what are the, can you give me on a system like you estimated capital costs here at 75 million? What are operating costs for a year for that system, just a ballpark?
From a ballpark perspective, I normally look at anything from a couple $1 million per year per station. And that varies wildly. Our capital cost is largely determined by two things. It's determined by number of stations, but also the number of hours and days of the year that it's going to be operational. If you want it to be operational 360 days of the year at 18 hours a day, your OpEx is going to be higher. If you're looking at it for, let's say, 12 to 16 hours a day, and you're willing to accept maybe a few weeks downtime to do the annual maintenance on the system, let's say whenever your slowest time of year is, then we can do it that way. There's a variety of ways of looking at it, and all of that would need to be figured out, you know, in terms to validate any of the numbers that we provided.
And then just in terms of when you were talking about, I was very interested in your the procurement unsolicited bid mechanism in Los Angeles and that. So when you talk about private sector investment or purchase of capital or funding of capital, is it like the private sector? Is it like the hotels or what is that?
It varies, right? The thing is so not all cable cars are going to be standalone profitable ventures, right? Like, let's say, for example, you were looking.
And I'm not saying they should be, by the way.
Yeah, exactly. You know, this is the weird thing that some people have trouble wrapping their mind around it. They go, oh, well, cable cars are profitable. And you go, well, hold on a second.
Yeah, right.
No. Some cable cars will be profitable, some will not, right? So the ones that are not, either you have to structure it as a traditional PPP where there's an availability payment or a backstop to guarantee the private sector a return on investment, and that's common in transit. Or it's simply a system that's owned by the public sector and you have no interest in making a profit. The flip side are systems like, in my opinion, something like the Clearwater situation, where there's a clear transit benefit, but there's a clear tourism market that can be tapped into. And the value capture of being able to release those lands from parking into other higher order uses, there's opportunities there. So every situation is different. The key thing is for a private sector entity to bring forward something like this, they typically need some kind of formal process or unsolicited bid mechanism that allows them to bring that forward. And, you know, we deal with this a lot of time. We're dealing with this with one of our government clients where they would like the private sector to be able to finance it, but they actually don't have a mechanism in place to allow that to occur.
And I just think it's interesting too, the cars as well. I think I remember from Medellin that our car fit 8 people, maybe 10. Whereas, you know, I mean, a lot of people have ridden other things like the Roosevelt tram, which is massive, or the, you know, that variation. But I'll just say, thanks for all that information. I probably even want to call you up and talk to you further and
anytime you
brain
want.
about some
Chris
things.
Shattuck has my contact information, so if you need.
Because I thought it was very interesting, your presentation. But and I'll just say to the board, I've never considered Lilium and the air taxi to even, as I've said many times before, to be a mass transit option. To me, that's totally a private sector venture. And, you know, I just I don't even know, honestly, why that's in the purview of TBARTA to be working on myself. You know, maybe explore it, but I mean, it was pretty obvious, even with those sample planes and the costs and everything like that, that's obviously something to me that it would be appropriate for the private sector development. And so I'll just say that generally, that's not you, Mr. Dale, but to the board in terms of my thoughts about this. But thank you very much.
If I could, though, just expand on that. One of the things when we talk about things like innovative technologies, we know that government is very risk averse, and they should be, right? We're not dealing with a technology that is new or unproven. We're dealing with something, again, this technology dates back more than 2,000 years. And the 2 companies that build it date from the 1890s. So this is a very established, developed industry where there is very little risk associated with it from a supplier perspective.
Well, I've always actually been a stickler about proof of concept and saw very little. So I'm always interested whenever, and like I said, I've used these systems. I was very interested in their capabilities, costs, and all that. So thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you for those comments.
Pat? Jim?
I have one more. Was there, yes?
Jim? Yeah, it's Daryl. How are you doing?
Oh, Daryl, how are
Hear me
you?
okay?
Nice to have you on board. We'll recognize you as a panelist along with Stephen, and I'll recognize you to have some additional comments.
Thank you. I just wanted to comment on Janet, and Karen, and David. Gwen also knows this. But Pat, we've actually met with the owners of the West Shore Mall, for example. We actually met with Joe Lopano and the Bucks, and different ideas and transit opportunities. And the folks that own the West Shore Mall are very, very enthusiastic relative to how they would even use that to help facilitate redeveloping the mall, how it would tie into Tampa International Airport, Tampa International Mall, and even the Bucks. And then, of course, bringing them over to Carolina in the Gateway area, and then, you know, St. Pete, and then, of course, Clearwater. So we looked at a lot of different aspects of this, crossing all over. And then we also looked at the delivery to the downtown Tampa market, and how we would tie into that, and what Jeff is doing and other things. So again, as Stephen pointed out, we've spent a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of money on this process. We have a group that's put together that would facilitate, each of the different components that would help deliver this. But ultimately, it's going to take TBARTA and the rest of the group to help facilitate from the perspective of the government how you would like to see this roll out, whether it's a public-private joint venture, or whether it's simply a private venture and or a public venture. Stephen, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that's bang on. And you know, I think one of the key things is there's so many ideas out here. And one of the reasons we made the recommendation of focus your attentions on a few different pilot ideas is it's very easy for this thing to spider out of control. And of course, the larger the thing you want to explore, the less detail you're going to get. So I think any future program of work, you should really try and be as targeted as possible with a vision towards proof of concept, such that there are more ideas out there. You know, I saw in the WSP study, you know, they highlighted the Kennedy corridor, which when you look at the Kennedy corridor, it's ideal for cable cars. It's wide, the retail and the buildings are set back from the street, and you've got the median in the corridor. And the idea of West Shore to downtown, perhaps, or West Shore up to the airport, or a combination of the two, that's certainly possible. But just be very, very intentional in what you're looking at, and you can get there.
Make some noise.
A quick question I have too for both Daryl or Stephen, and maybe Alan can comment as well. I think under the Florida PPP statute, there is a mechanism for an unsolicited proposal. And I think what you have in mind by a potential PPP model is to have, for example, the city of Clearwater backstop a certain number of guaranteed rides per year. Is that what you had in mind?
That would be the ideal scenario. Though in that scenario, it essentially becomes like a public utilities commission, and it becomes a relatively straightforward to finance. The key thing to remember is that your backstop is on the delta between what the needed ridership is for an ROI and what actually occurs, right? So you're not backstopping the entire ridership, you're just backstopping the delta. And then what happens in the event that there's an overage, that's negotiable. And the overage could be put in, or a portion of it could be put into some kind of reserve fund, such that if there's ever a shortfall, then you already have the money waiting there in order to cover that shortfall in the future.
Alan, can you comment in terms of the ability of Florida statutes to allow for that mechanism now?
Yeah, let me address a couple things. First of all, on the unsolicited proposal, I'm not familiar with the LA County policy, but this board adopted an unsolicited proposal policy as part of your procurement manual that you adopted in May. So we have an unsolicited proposal. As far with regard to that discussion very recently about backstopping, and I know Ms. Leos is going to have heard this before. So that language really concerns me in Florida from a public standpoint. Public entities can't be backstopping private entities in their profit or losses. So the funding would have to be set up to comply with the Florida Constitution. And that funding cannot be such that a private entity is in the terminology being backstopped by public entities. And while I have the floor, just thought for those, I know some of those on the Zoom meeting probably are aware, but the Imagine Clearwater project, which the city of Clearwater is moving forward with, would do away with that parking lot that was shown in the presentation on the mainland. That would not be there. That would be developed as part of an expanded Coachman Park. And that actually might create more reason for the project, but you would not have that parking lot there that was shown. For those of you that are not familiar with the Imagine Clearwater project, but since I'm representing Clearwater with regard to that project, I thought I would bring that up.
Mr. Chair, to that point, I do believe that there's another spot that we could put the station at. So never fear, that will not get in our way. Thank you, Mr. Zimmet.
Daryl, you're want to say something further?
Yeah, I just, as far as the term backstop, what we're really talking about is what Stephen was speaking to just a little bit ago, which is, let's assume that it takes, I don't know, pick a number, 1 million riders a year, okay, to facilitate, okay, a successful operation. And let's say that the city and county that we're operating in, we end up doing 650 or 700,000. So it's really just that incremental delta that Stephen was talking about, that $300,000, if you will. And then don't forget the opportunity there, as Pat and others were alluding to, is how you want to facilitate the charges. And you have the opportunity and flexibility to facilitate that, where locals are paying X, tourists are paying Y. So for example, when we met with the city of Clearwater folks, and then also the folks on the beaches that own most of the hotels out there, their interest was to offload all of their employees into downtown in downtown Clearwater, that would help, that would be in the new parking garage that Janet and Karen were referring to earlier, and then they would then be, transported over, because ultimately the parking becomes a lot more valuable when we're in Clearwater Beach. And so you have a lot of those opportunities as well. I would also point out to you right now that given the current bonding capacity and the current rates and interest costs, and that opportunity that now exists in today's market, given everything that's happened, this option and this opportunity is extremely attractive right now, and how we would go about facilitating that from a public-private venture.
I'd also, if I could jump in to Alan's comments about the issues with backstops. I'd be interested to know how, for example, water and electricity is delivered in the Florida context. I'm not familiar with that, but it's very similar to a power purchase agreement where a government contracts with a power utility and says, I will purchase this amount of power from you per year, even if I don't need it, in order to basically get that new power plant built. This is a relatively common structure that exists, and in transit, it's increasingly more and more common. So that's not a challenge to you, Alan. It's just it would be interested to unpack these ideas a little bit further.
Okay. Well, the system power companies in Florida don't work that way.
Okay.
I'm not aware of any such agreement in the state of Florida.
Alan, this is Daryl. We actually do a couple of these even in water. It's called a take or pay contract, and it's done. I've done it myself in the state of Florida, and so that's what you're really alluding to.
So Mr.
you're providing
Chair,
capacity. Go ahead.
Yes,
Jen, sorry.
Oh, I just wanted to say that Alan is very accustomed to having folks push back on him. And if there's anybody that can help us figure out a way to get this done, I'm pretty sure he will. Right, Alan?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah, we have a unique opportunity here where there's obviously clear interest in both Pinellas and Hillsborough County, and hopefully Pasco and the other counties as well, because this is such a flexible kind of system that can be deployed virtually anywhere given changed circumstances. So it's a unique opportunity. David, let's put this on you to say what are the very quickest next steps we can have to facilitate moving forward on a project like this, especially where there is a commonality of interest with the developer, Forward Pinellas, Hillsborough County, certain corridors in terms of pinning down certain alignments using the resources we have available from the grant.
And don't forget the economic opportunities, David and Jim, because for sure that's something that the Florida legislature is going to be very interested in as they move forward this next year.
Well, the Florida legislature, in giving us the grant to do this, was very focused on those opportunities as well. David, will you illuminate now some potential forward steps?
Absolutely. So what I plan to do after the meeting is to contact Whit and to discuss this with him further as to how TBARTA could partner with Forward Pinellas on advancing this further. And as Alan indicated, TBARTA already does have an unsolicited proposal mechanism in our procurement manual. So we will take a closer look at that to see what flexibility that provides us and moving forward as well. And if not within our own policy, then potentially Forward Pinellas has something in their policies that could allow us to move forward. And obviously we need to contact the city of Clearwater too, and just reorient this project with them and find out what their level of interest is.
Jim?
Karen, yeah.
Daryl. Jim, if I could add one thing.
Sure.
Also, David Gwynn, and I see David's on, and the DOT have been involved with us for a while and has been very supportive. And obviously, David and the DOT, I think, should be involved in this process as well. And maybe David would like to speak to that. There will be an integral part of how this gets facilitated.
Clearly, absolutely. David, any comments?
No, we'd be glad to continue the discussions. We're always looking for potential transportation alternatives. So yeah, we'd enjoy being part of the conversation and seeing where we might be able to work with you on it.
Karen, I think you had your hand up. You're recognized.
Thank you. At one point, and I haven't talked to Mayor Kreisman recently, but I believe City of St. Petersburg was interested as well. So let's, and I think if Hillsborough and Tampa is interested, we need to be identifying as many potential routes as possible. Thank you.
Yes, Mayor Kreisman actually did engage us to help facilitate looking at those options for the benefit of the city of St. Pete, and they are keenly aware and very interested. So you're correct, Karen.
All this said, I would entertain a motion to a strong resolution to endorse moving forward with this very quickly. Someone care to make a motion to that effect? Karen?
I will move forward and make a motion post haste.
Second.
Okay, there's been a motion and a second. Any public comment?
I don't have any public comment at this time.
Okay, any further discussions? Call the roll, please.
Jim Holton,
Yes.
Cliff Manuel, Cliff, I didn't hear you. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I can't.
Commissioner, yeah, I can't hear him. We'll go back to him. Commissioner Long,
Yes.
Rich McLean,
Yes, and great discussion.
Commissioner Kemp, Commissioner Kemp, Commissioner Starkey,
Yes.
Commissioner Seal,
Yeah.
Commissioner Mitten.
Yes.
Okay. We are one short, so we do have six to zero moving forward.
And Mr. Chairman, I see Cliff Manuel is in the meeting, but unfortunately his audio does not appear to be operable. So I'm not sure how we can be in contact with him for a vote on this.
Jennifer, can you call him?
Chris, can he call in? Does he have a number where he can call in?
I'm trying to see if I
Yeah,
can.
and did Kemp, she was on.
Yeah,
I think she may have left the meeting. I don't see her in the panel right now. I would advise, if I think Jennifer is looking for a number too, if she can call Cliff and put him on speaker.
Yes.
He may be able to vote that way.
Okay, I'm going to put myself on mute for a moment.
And I know, I think Cliff was having some technical issues with his bandwidth, and that may be the audio problem. So I would guess his intention is to be in the meeting.
It did go straight to voicemail, so I will also send him a text to let him know that there is an interest here. I did send him a text, so I will let everybody know if I hear back from him. At this point, it would be a 6-0 in approval.
Okay, let's give it a second so we can conclude this.
Chair Holden, do you want me to go ahead with the election of the officers while we try to wait for?
Well, let's just try to conclude it, then I'll take any old or new business, then do that at the very last minute before adjournment.
Okay.
You text Kemp.
Bear with me while I look up her number. I just sent Kip a message as well.
Is Cliff still showing as a member of the, on the meeting or no?
He is still a member of the meeting, but he has no audio enabled, which sometimes can be a microphone not hooked up or not working on his end. But it does show him in attendance, yes.
At this point, I have not heard back from either one of them.
So, Mr. Chair, where does that leave us in terms of action today?
Well, if we don't have 7, we have no official resolution. It will have to be deferred, but that's widespread consensus. I think we safely, with Alan's consent, move forward anyway with discussions, and the resolution is not absolutely necessary for any substantive action.
I mean,
Jim,
I think,
do you have, this is Daryl, do you have the, like we do at Johns Hopkins, have the ability to go ahead and have a vote and then still have the other people, you can reach out to them later and then have their vote recorded at a later date?
No,
You don't have the ability to do that probably?
Unfortunately not here because of.
Okay.
so
Okay.
what we can do is, I think David could move forward, given the consensus of the board, and put this in the meantime, but also put this back on the agenda for next meeting for a formal vote.
Yeah, as a practical matter, there's no real difference. It's just a strong resolution of endorsement at the next meeting. So we'll move forward. Sounds good. Well, great. Daryl and
Well,
Steve, thanks for that.
If I may, Jim, I just wanted to thank all of y'all for giving us this opportunity, for Stephen, Dale, and Steve and myself. And we appreciate everybody, especially through the last few years, that have helped and meet with us and support us along the way. And all of y'all know you are, which is most of y'all up here. So again, thank y'all very much. We genuinely appreciate it, and we look forward to working together.
Absolutely. And thanks for the presentation and your commitment.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, guys.
You're welcome, everyone.
All right. See you later.
Here.
Bye.
All right. The last order of regular business is old or new business. Any old or new business to come before the board? Okay, none being heard, I'll recognize Alan to conduct the board officers elections.
Yes. Thank you, Chair Holtman. So the bylaws adopted by TBARTA provide that the officers serve one-year term and that the election of the officers is to be held at the August board meeting, August regular meeting every year. So today the board needs to elect a chair, vice chair, and secretary treasurer. As you all know, Jim Holton is presently the chair. The vice chair is Cliff Manuel, and the secretary treasurer is Janet Long. We will need 7 members to be able to pass a motion to elect the officers for this year. So hopefully Mr. Manuel's back on. If not, we'll have to put this off till next meeting. I still see he is listed as a panelist, but again, no audio.
That is true. Yeah, I've left him on there, and unfortunately, I think that's on his end to connect the microphone.
Chris, do you have the ability to send him a message through chat if he?
I have generally, let me take a look. I have, I usually disable chat for these public meetings because, as you know, it's all public record, but let me generally no, but let me see what I can do.
Either that or just, the only other thought was to try and email to him because maybe he doesn't have a cell phone nearby.
I'm going to try to email him as well too.
I will email his assistant right now too.
Ask him to give me a call. I did email him to see if he can, if he calls me, I'll obviously be watching for that.
I also sent Lindsay an email as well.
No word back, Jennifer? Okay, Alan, I would, with your permission, I would suggest deferring this until the next session. Then it seems like we're holding everyone up here.
Yeah, that's fine. Under the bylaws, the officers continue to serve until the replacements are elected. So the three will continue to serve until we have a quorum and can elect officers for the next year.
Sounds good. Thanks, everyone. I'll accept a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn, but Mr. Chair, should we, oh, I guess our next board meeting is in August. Okay, I move we adjourn second.
All right, meeting adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.